Hi, my name is Joseph Kiefer, better yet known on the internet as Pugsr. I started this YouTube channel 15 years ago in 2011, and 15 years ago, I was doing Nerf gun reviews in my backyard. And then eventually I started doing Let's Play videos by pointing a camcorder at my TV in my basement. Now 15 years later, here we are with over 100,000 viewers watching me do scary book, scary movie, and scary video game reviews. You are all so amazing to me, and I don't deserve it, truly. My life would be nowhere near as good as it is without each and every one of you. Each and every one of you means the world to me. Really. I can't even think about where I would be without you. But today we are going to be doing Bram Stoker's Dracula, one of the most famous Gothic horror books of all time. You can even feel its influence today. Seriously. I even bought a cat tree for my cat Panic because of this occasion, because I love the book Dracula so much. I've always been fond of vampires and werewolf stories and stuff like that. And I cannot wait to share it all with you, because you will notice things that you will see in modern media that come from this book right here. But if you don't know how we do things on this channel, let me break it down for you. We start out with an intro, which you are listening to now. You know the rest. However, I once again want to point out that my life is so much better because each and every one of you. From my heart, seriously, thank you. You sitting right behind your computer right now, your phone, your TV. Seriously, you have made my life worth living, and I love each and every one of you for it. But without going too much further into this intro, let us do Bram Stoker's Dracula. Before we get started, know that Dracula is not just a normal fiction book. It is told through diary entries as the book goes on in almost real time. So note that I will let you know the date when it changes, as well as who is speaking when that changes. There's also quite a few illustrations in the copy that I am using, which I will also show on screen. Other than that, please enjoy. 3rd of May, Jonathan Harker's journal. Jonathan says that he left Munich 2 days ago, and he arrived in Vienna the next morning, although the train was late, which is common. He walked around a bit until he left Vienna to get to Klausenburg. He stopped at a hotel called the Hotel Royal while he was there. He ate some lovely dinner and even says he likes it so much that he wants to get the recipe for his girlfriend Mina. He asks the waiter what it is, and the waiter says that the recipe is very common and can be found all across the Carpathians, which is where he's headed. Not to mention that when he was in London, he picked up a map and read about where he was off to. He was off to go meet a nobleman in the region of Transylvania. The region is on the border of Transylvania, Moldova, and Bukovina. It is part of Europe that is very unknown and wildly still in the year that this takes place, which is the late 1800s. There's not a lot of maps in this region even available. However, the post town he needs to go to before he gets to Castle Dracula is called Bistritz, and it's actually pretty well known despite its region. He says he's writing all of this down so he can remember talking points when he gets home so he can talk to Mina about his journey. He explains the different cultures and races of people all in the region and reminds himself to ask the Count about all of them when he gets to the castle. He says last night, when he was in Hotel Royal, he had a horrible night sleeping. He heard a dog howling out his window all night. Towards the morning, he also became very thirsty, and he remained thirsty no matter how much he drank. That morning, he overslept and had to even run to the train because he was so late, but when he got there, the train was even later than he was by 30 minutes. He says that the train lazily went through the countryside that day, and eventually he got to Bistritz this morning, where he is now writing this journal in the hotel here. He explains that Bistritz is on the border of Bukovina, near a place called the Borgo Pass. When he arrived, he says that the hotel was very nice and old-fashioned. He was received by an old woman who said that she had been expecting him, saying that she was to be housing an Englishman. She calls an older gentleman in with her, who says that a letter from Count Dracula came for him. He reads it, and it says that at 3 p.m. tomorrow, a large carriage will come for him and take him to the Borgo Pass, where, when he gets to that location, another smaller carriage of Dracula's own will receive him. He says he's happy to have a plan, and he needs to get a good night's sleep tonight. May 4th. When Jonathan wakes up, he was greeted by the landlady who gave him the room, the one who received him yesterday. She seemed very strange this morning, however. She seemed anxious and not herself. She says that she received a letter from Count Dracula making sure that Jonathan got to his carriage at 3 p.m. today, making sure that he got there. Jonathan tries to ask more about the Count and his castle, but the woman clams up and says she doesn't understand his German, which is weird because everyone else that had received him before understood him perfectly well. The woman and the husband acted very weird when Jonathan said he needed to get going. She then begged him to stay, saying, "It's the 4th of May. It's St. George's Day. At midnight tonight, all evil things in the world come out and attack people." Jonathan says he doesn't really care much about silly superstitions. But then, strangely, the woman drops to her knees and begs him not to go. She asks, "Don't you know where you're going and what it implies?" Jonathan says he thinks he does, and he admits that her begging made him quite uncomfortable and scared a bit. But he does have business at Count Dracula's castle, and he can't not go. The woman gets up and dries her tears and gives him a crucifix for protection with him at least. As a member of the Church of England, Jonathan doesn't really want to take it, but because of how weird all of this was, he takes it anyway. He finishes the entry by saying he hears the coach coming and he has to go. When he got on, the driver was late, of course, he says. But when he got on it, he found there were a few other passengers actually going through the Borgo Pass. They all looked at him strangely and almost scared. They muttered words he didn't really know, but he pulled out his dictionary and found out they were saying words like wolf or hell or vampire. They then did the sign of the cross when they saw him, and then he asks, "Why are you guys doing that?" They said it was protection against the evil eye, whatever that means. He says he made a note to ask the Count about all of these strange superstitions. After this, people in the courtyard waiting as well made the sign of the cross and pointed towards Jonathan. This made Jonathan very uncomfortable because he was in an unfamiliar land going to meet an unfamiliar man. But people were kind and sad when they saw him. It was very strange. Finally, the coach driver got there and got on and they went on their way. It was quite a journey, and he talks more about the people in this land. But then they ride up to a snowy mountain area and the coach driver stops the horses. He tells them all to look, and he calls this God's Seat. They continue and the sun starts going down. They pass some Czechs and Slovaks farming. They're all working around and in strange clothes. Eventually, the carriage slows down as they continue to go up the mountains. And then it became so slow that Jonathan almost said that he'd walk the rest of the way. But the coach driver told him to sit back down. He says the dogs around here are very fierce. Jonathan sits back down and they continue. The coach driver cracks the whip at the horses over and over and they eventually sped back up. They continued and eventually stopped where Jonathan was going to get out and go on Dracula's carriage. However, there currently was no carriage, so they waited. As they wait, the other passengers once again do the protection of the evil eye again towards him. They give Jonathan more gifts without taking no for an answer. After about an hour, the original carriage driver turns around and says in broken German that it seems that Jonathan was not expected after all. They should leave immediately, and maybe Jonathan could come back in a day or two with a different driver. All of a sudden, as if out of nowhere, clouds roll in above the mountains and thunder cracks across the sky. It's as if the sky splits in two over the mountain itself. All of a sudden, screams ring out and another carriage comes out of nowhere and overtakes their own. Red lights coming from the lamps are all over the carriage and it stops right in front of them in the moonlight. The horses of the carriage are as black as coal, and its driver is tall with a large black hat and a pointed brown beard. "You're here early tonight," Dracula's driver says to Jonathan's driver. Jonathan's driver says, "No, you're just late." Dracula's driver says, "You cannot fool me, mister. You tried to leave early and take my guest away from me." Jonathan then says at that point he could see Dracula's driver a little better. He had blood-red lips and white skin. "Give me the mister's luggage," Dracula's driver said to the other. And Jonathan got out of the one carriage. One of the other passengers whispers and says, "The dead travel fast." Once Jonathan gets off his carriage, Dracula's carriage driver helps him get on his carriage, and Jonathan notes that the driver's strength was almost unnaturally strong. A steel grip. Then the original carriage driver drives off as fast as he can. Dracula's driver then says that there's a bottle of brandy in the seat with Jonathan if he gets thirsty. And then they're off. Jonathan says he doesn't really want to drink, but he is at least more at ease knowing that there's a drink there if he needs it. As they go through the mountains, it seems they are driving in a straight line, but Jonathan could swear they're somehow going in circles, despite not turning anywhere. Then the howls of wolves come. They are very loud, although the wolves don't seem to be that close. but the sounds seem to circle the carriage as they drive. The horses start freaking out, and so does Jonathan. However, the driver seems to not be so scared. He jumps up the carriage and calms the horses and continues on as if nothing is wrong. They continue driving and the howls seem to get closer and closer, but the driver keeps his composure. Eventually, as they drive, a small blue flame appears near the carriage. Both Jonathan and the driver notice it, and for some reason, the driver stops the horses and jumps off the carriage and goes near it. It goes out and the driver gets back on the carriage as if nothing happened. Jonathan says he must have fallen asleep, because all of a sudden, the driver did it again. And again. And again. Almost as if he was collecting blue flames all over. They continue on and the snow grows thicker and the air grows colder. The driver stops the carriage again and gets out to go towards another blue flame. But this time, he puts rocks around it, and then somehow, it's as if the driver becomes transparent. This frightens Jonathan greatly, after which the driver once again comes back and gets on the carriage. They continue on, and then one last time, the driver gets off the carriage and walks so far away that Jonathan can no longer see him. Finally, the clouds clear up and the wolves are finally seen all around the carriage. They circle it and the horses start freaking out, as does Jonathan. Jonathan starts hitting the side of the carriage and making a lot of noise to scare them off, but out of nowhere, the driver comes back and raises one arm as if he were sweeping the light itself away, and the clouds rolled back and the darkness overtook them yet again. The wolves back off, and the driver gets back on the carriage. This weird power scares Jonathan so much that he's pretty much catatonic. So much so that as they pull up to the castle, Jonathan doesn't even seem to notice. It's as if the castle just appeared to him. The towers are huge, and the moon comes back as he steps off the carriage. Jonathan says he must have been sleeping because it made no sense that the castle just appeared. The courtyard was massive, and the carriage driver helps him off the carriage, and Jonathan once again notes how extremely strong he is. Jonathan looks up at the castle and wonders, what should he do? Should he knock on the front door? The wait felt like it was forever before anything happened. During the wait, he thought about how he was here as a solicitor. Pretty much a lawyer, by the way. He just passed his test in London and is now a solicitor. After a while, a man appeared in the front door. A massively tall man that was clean-shaven except for a white mustache. He was clad in all black, no color anywhere. "Welcome to my house. Come in, if you please," he said in perfect English. However, he didn't motion for Jonathan whatsoever. Jonathan takes the Count's hand, and it feels very much like the steel grip of the carriage driver. If he didn't know any better, he'd say that the driver was the Count himself, somehow. As he takes his hand, the Count says, "Welcome to my house. Enter and be happy. And leave a little bit of that happiness here when you leave." Jonathan, making sure this was in fact the Count, asks, "Count Dracula?" And the Count says, "That is who I am." As Jonathan steps through the door, he starts carrying his bags, but Dracula says, No. He will carry them. Jonathan is the guest after all. The Count carries the bags through the dining room at first, which is well lit and gorgeous, and dinner was already set. Then he carries them to a large bedroom. The Count says, "Take some time and use the bathroom and set up your toiletries, and then come down to dinner." However, the Count says he will not eat though, because he's already ate, so excuse him, but he will at least sit and talk with Jonathan as he eats. As they sit, Jonathan eats roast chicken and drinks some tokay, and the Count asks him some questions about his long journey and listens with rapt attention to Jonathan talking. After they eat, the Count goes to sit by the fireplace and lights a cigar for Jonathan, although he himself does not smoke, he says. Jonathan looks at the man's appearance again. He is tall, but he has very angular features. He has huge eyebrows and his hair is long and unkempt, except for his temples, which the hair is thinning around. His ears are extremely pointy, and his mouth looks cruel, in which his teeth seem sharper than a normal person's. As the Count sits, his hands rest on his lap, and Jonathan makes a note how sharp his nails are, as well as the hair in the center of his palms for some reason. As they sit, the Count's hand accidentally brushes across Jonathan's at one point, and a strange feeling of nausea comes over Jonathan, although he said it might just be because the Count had old man breath. Noticing Jonathan make a weird face after, the Count smiles meekly at him. Jonathan then looks out the window and notices it's almost morning already. 5 a.m. or so. Wolves then howl somewhere near the castle, and the Count stands up and says, "Ah, listen to them, the children of the night. What beautiful music they make." The Count then looks at Jonathan, who must have had a confused expression, and he says, "Ah, someone from the city must not be able to understand. A real hunter knows these kind of beauties." After that, he says Jonathan must be tired. The Count says he will return tomorrow around noon. He has business to go to. So Jonathan should sleep long and hard. The Count bows and shows Jonathan to his room once again. Jonathan goes to bed and he says he has a lot of feelings about being here. He feels scared, strange, intrigued, and a lot of other feelings. May 7th. Jonathan says he slept a long time and he woke up around 4 or 5 p.m. the next day. When he got up, he went to the dining room and found a note from the Count. It says that he has business to attend to and he will be back around evening. The table was already set for Jonathan, however, so he ate a cold breakfast as well as had some coffee which was left on the hearth. After he was done, he looks around so he can try to let the servants know so they can get the dishes, but the more he looks around, the more it seems like there really is no one in the castle but the Count and him. He looks around a bit more and he found all the furniture on the castle is beautiful and old. Another oddity he notices, however, is that there are no mirrors in the castle. But he says he brought a little mirror so he can shave at least. As he looks around, he gets a bit bored, but he doesn't want to fully explore the castle without the Count's permission. However, he noticed a door in his bedroom earlier, so he goes back and he opens it and he sees a huge library. Jackpot. He's surprised to see tons of books in English of all languages. Books on politics, botany, culinary stuff, and other subjects. Jonathan begins reading a law book, and out of nowhere, a voice calls out, "Ah, I'm glad you found this place. All of these books have kept me good company over the years. I read them and I feel as if I'm strolling through London. But it's actually different having an Englishman here to help me with my English." Jonathan says, "But sir, your English is very good already." The Count then has a very strange speech after. He says how, although his English is serviceable, it's not amazing. Here in Transylvania, he is a noble, someone of high class, someone who speaks regally in his native tongue. But if he were to go to London, it would be noticed that he has an accent. He figures people would look at him as an outsider if they heard him speak. He wants Jonathan to tutor him in English while he is here, so he can speak perfect English, without an accent even, so he's not looked like as an outsider in London. Jonathan says, of course he'll tutor the Count while he's here. However, Jonathan wants to ask him about those weird little blue flames he saw on the way here. The Count says those flames are there to ward off evil spirits on St. George's Day. There's an old legend about a treasure by them as well. He then asks Jonathan if he would even remember where to look if he went back out there for the blue flames. And Jonathan says he has about the same idea as a dead man as where they would be. That being no idea. The Count says, "Ah, good." And then he asks about this property that he is going to be buying in London. That is why Jonathan is here, after all, to discuss the property so that the Count may purchase the house there. Jonathan says, "Of course, let's get down to business." And he describes the property as old and dark. It's probably as old as the Middle Ages. There's nothing nearby it other than an asylum and a church. Dracula says, "Ah, very good," because he likes old and dark places so he can be alone. His family is very old after all, and new houses don't feel lived in or homely to him. Jonathan says, oh, he gets it, he thinks. Then he gets the contracts and papers ready so that the Count can sign them and purchase the house, and as he signs his name, the Count leaves and gets dinner ready. After about an hour of waiting, Jonathan gets bored and looks at the map of London, and the Count has seemingly written on this map. His new property is circled, called the Carfax Estate, as well as Jonathan's law offices where he works. As he looks closer, the Count comes back and says Jonathan works too hard. Dinner's ready. Jonathan follows, and the same thing happens as the night before. He eats alone, although the Count talks to him about London. After dinner, they sit by the fireplace, and the Count talks all night about London. Jonathan finds this strange, but not wanting to be rude, he stays up all night with the Count. When morning comes, the Count says, "I apologize. Your stories of London are so interesting that it's almost morning again." He then jokes that Jonathan shouldn't make his stories so interesting or they'll end up staying up all night again. He then takes Jonathan to his room and says that he'll be away on business again tomorrow. But Jonathan has free reign of the castle, other than the doors that are locked, of course. He then leaves Jonathan, and Jonathan writes this entry right before he goes to bed. May 8th. Jonathan says that he's writing this entry because he was right to write all of this down, because there's something very strange going on in this castle. He says after the night of talking, he tried to go to bed, but he couldn't sleep. So he got up and started shaving just to pass the time. He puts the mirror up in front of him and starts shaving. After a few minutes, a voice came from behind him. "Good morning," it said. It startled Jonathan horribly because it was the Count, and somehow he didn't see him come in the room, which makes no sense because the mirror should have showed him everything behind him, including the doorway to his room. When Jonathan was scared, he cut himself while shaving. The Count sees this, and his face lights up with demonic fury, and he reaches towards Jonathan's neck, but the crucifix he got was around his neck, and the fire in the Count's eyes immediately go away, and he composes himself. Take care. Take care how you cut yourself in this country. We have strange customs, some of which you've seen. Jonathan looks in the mirror yet again, and this time there can be no mistake. There is no reflection of the Count in the mirror. A strange uneasiness fills the room when the Count is in it. Jonathan now notices this. Whenever the Count is in the room, a strange feeling persists. The Count then sees the mirror and strangely calls it a dreadful thing. He then opens a window and throws the mirror out the window. He then leaves Jonathan, and then Jonathan wonders, how's he going to shave without a mirror now? Which seems like the least of his problems at this moment. However, he then goes to eat breakfast and the Count is nowhere to be found anymore. So, he eats alone, and then he explores. He sees doors everywhere, many of which are locked, but he finds a window overlooking the south. He looks out it, and although it's beautiful, he notes that the castle is atop a cliff. It must be 1,000 feet down out this window. He ends the chapter by saying, "This is a prison, and I am a prisoner." Once Jonathan realizes he was a prisoner, he starts freaking out, pulling doors and running up and down the stairs like a cat with the zoomies. All of a sudden, he hears a door open below him. He knows the Count's back. The Count doesn't immediately go to find Jonathan, so Jonathan looks through a crack in the door in his room, and sure enough, the Count's making his bed. This confirmed Jonathan's thought that there is no servants here. The Count does all of this by himself. Jonathan follows the Count and watches him also make the table and put the food on it. There really is no servants. And Jonathan has a horrible thought, and that means that the Count was the carriage driver. But why did he do all of that? How did he do all of that? With the wolves and the supernatural strength and the control of the clouds. Around midnight of that night, Jonathan says he talked to the Count and made sure to not let him know that Jonathan was onto him. He tried to make it seem that he was still happy to be there. So, he asks the Count about Transylvania history. The Count lights up like a light, happy to talk about it. He talks about battles and wars and everything that took place in this area. But he always talked about these things as if he were there, using words like we and us. Jonathan thinks that maybe he means like the royal we, but it's strange nonetheless. After which, like all the other days, dawn starts breaking through the clouds and the Count tells Jonathan to go to sleep. May 12th. Jonathan says he needs to keep a level head if he wants to get out of here. He cannot confuse things he's read in books for what is happening now. Earlier today, he said that he and the Count had a chat, and the Count asked him in London if it was possible to have more than one solicitor. Remember, a solicitor is like a lawyer. Or would that be weird? Is it possible to have one solicitor for expenses, one for real estate, and one for something else entirely? If one would want to keep all of their businesses private, Jonathan says, yeah, that might be a good idea. It might be a little weird, but not unheard of. The Count lights up and says, good. But then he asks Jonathan if he has written any letters to any of his friends or families or his boss Hawkins since he's been here. Jonathan says, no. And the Count puts a hand on her shoulder and says, you should do that now then. And in those letters, Jonathan should write that he will stay here another month. Jonathan cries out, a month? And the Count says that his employer, Hawkins, said that Jonathan would tend to his every desire. He wasn't mistaken, right? Jonathan didn't see any way out of this, so he bows and the Count smiles a victorious smile, one in which he knew that the Count thinks that he won. He then tells Jonathan to start writing letters because he has to write some of his own. Jonathan does so and then he reads a book nearby, and the Count leaves for a few minutes. Jonathan, seeing this opportunity, goes and reads the letters the Count had written. They were all addressed to people Jonathan didn't know, and even one to Budapest. He heard the Count come back quickly, and he quickly returns to his seat. The Count says, "You must excuse me, I have work to do." He then warns Jonathan. Jonathan can do whatever he wants in this castle, but do not fall asleep anywhere but his own room in this castle. If he does, then he makes a motion as if he's cleaning his hands. Jonathan gets the message. Later that night, Jonathan returns to his room and puts the crucifix above his bed to ward off nightmares and, more importantly, to ward off the Count. He then thinks how this is all getting to him. He's been up every night and his sleep pattern is messed up. He feels jumpy and thinks weird thoughts. He stares out the window and then suddenly he sees a shape move from a window slightly below him on the castle. He's pretty sure it's the Count's room, and he sees the Count's face come out of the window, and it amuses Jonathan for a second. But then the Count climbs out of the window and starts climbing down the wall. This frightens Jonathan. It's supernatural looking. He's gripping the tiny bits of cobblestone that extend past the base and climbing downwards. But then the Count turns upside down and continues. He is climbing upside down, going down the castle. His cloak masks what his legs are doing, but it's as if he were a lizard on a wall. Jonathan wonders what sort of creature he is. What sort of monster? He then goes back to his room and contemplates. May 15th. Jonathan says that he's been wandering and trying to figure out more about the castle, finding that 3 of the castle walls are nigh impregnable, and the other one is an entrance. It's all on a mountain, and it's quite impossible to climb out a window to escape, at least for him, he thinks. On a spiral staircase that night, he finds a door at the top that is very heavy, but surprisingly, not locked, just off its hinges. He forces it open and goes inside, and it's very dusty. But there's a beautiful table, and Jonathan thinks that maybe at some point a beautiful woman might have written on that table. In the room, there was beautiful moonlight. He felt sleepy in the moonlight, and he pulled up a couch and fell asleep looking out the window. As he was starting to drift off, he thought of the Count's warning about not sleeping anywhere but his room, but he joyfully disobeyed, as he's keeping him prisoner anyway, why would he listen to him? He then awoke, and then he thinks that what he saw must have been a dream. He was in the same room, his footprints in the dust just below this couch. All of a sudden, 3 women just appeared. 2 were darker and 1 was pale like the Count, with blonde hair. Their teeth like pearls and their lips red as blood. He doesn't know why, but he all of a sudden was overcome with the desire for them to kiss him. He feels bad for writing this and hope Mina never reads it, but he's overwhelmed with this feeling. However, he stayed quiet and only looked through the smallest gap in his eyelids. One of the women whispered, "You go first. It's your right." The one she was talking to then starts saying, "Calm down. There's enough kisses for all of us." He could then see the woman bend down, and it seemed like she was going to kiss his neck and not his lips, which he found weird. He then felt a different feeling, a monstrous one. He could tell it was the Count entering the room, but this time it was fiery and angry, an extreme feeling of bloodlust. Jonathan opened his eyes and he saw the Count grabs the woman's neck and throws her across the room with extreme power. The Count whispers, but extremely loudly, "How dare you, any of you? How dare any of you lay your eyes on him when I expressly forbid it? He is mine. I tell you that if you try again, you will have to deal with me." They then turn to him and say that, he never allows them to love. He doesn't even get to love himself. The Count says he does have love in his heart. They should all know that from the past. They then beg and say, they're not allowed to have anything tonight. And the Count then drops a bag and says, he got this specifically for them, if they leave Jonathan alone. From the bag, Jonathan could hear cries and wails, like that of a child. After this, horror overcame Jonathan, and he passed out. Jonathan then woke up in his bed. He thought that must have been a dream. But then he looks at the bottom of his bed, and on it are Jonathan's clothes, folded in a manner in which he's never folded them before. Not only that, his watch is unwound. He thinks that it must not have been a dream, because he always winds his watch right before bed. The Count must have dragged him here after all of that. After all those women, or whatever they were, almost sucked his blood. After he gets up, he goes back downstairs and tries to go to that place he was last night, but the door is now slammed shut, unable to be opened. May 19th. Jonathan says that he feels like his time is limited. Last night, the Count told him to write 3 more letters to his friends and boss. The Count said that Jonathan should date the letters for June 12th, June 19th, and then June 29th. When questioned why, the Count lied and said, "The post is weird around here. This is just to make sure that they would get there on time." Jonathan wanted to tell him no, but he could not raise suspicion. He was truly under the Count's power now. After Jonathan writes the letters, the Count grabbed them and head out. Jonathan says he knows the date he will die now. June 29th. May 29th. Jonathan is near the ground floor and sees a bunch of people outside the window in front of the castle. He sees them and sees that they are people who he calls gypsies, or Sagani, depending on which version of the book you have. And by that, he means they don't seem to be loyal to any law or country. So he figures that maybe he could pass them letters and then they could post them for him. He quickly writes some letters about what is happening to his boss and Mina. He leaves out the supernatural stuff to not scare them, however. He calls over a man from his tower and he throws the letter out the window and a gold piece to the man. And then he tries to explain to the guy to post them, but he has trouble talking to him, but eventually he gets through. Jonathan covers his heart and leaves. Later that night, the Count comes back and into Jonathan's room and looks at him. His eyes became fiery like he saw before. The Count says he took these from a man in town. He then pulls out a bunch of letters and shows Jonathan. He says, "There are 2 letters here. One is to your boss Hawkins, and I will post this. But the other one is a vile spit on our friendship." He then pulls out a candle and burns the letter to Mina. The Count says he read both, but he will still post the one to Hawkins. He then leaves Jonathan's room. Then later he comes back and says, "I won't be able to talk tonight, so just go to bed." Jonathan does so. May 31st. Today, Jonathan wakes up and realizes that all of his pens and paper are gone. Stolen. He figures this must be a new villainous plot. He also looks in the wardrobe and realizes one of his suits is missing. The one he came here in, nonetheless. June 17th. In the morning, Jonathan hears a crack of whips and horse hooves on the cobblestones outside. He looks out his window and sees a carriage pulled by 8 horses and a few Slovaks. He figures that he's saved, and he runs down the stairs and tries the front door, but surprise, surprise, it is locked. He runs back up the stairs and looks out the window and screams, trying to get the driver's attention. But the Sagani, perhaps the leader of them, says something to the carriage driver, and they both look back up at Jonathan and laugh. The guy must have told him he was crazy. They then leave, and Jonathan once again is alone. June 24th. Jonathan is bored today, so he goes upstairs and thinks. The Saganis that are outside the window have to be working for the Count somehow. That means there has to be a servant's quarters somewhere. As he thinks this, he goes back upstairs and looks out the window. He wanted to see the Count leave the castle again in his lizard-like way. But when he looked, he was surprised to see the Count was doing so, but in his clothes, the suit that was stolen. And not only that, he also held that bag he saw with those women, the one that the childlike whales came from. He puts 2 and 2 together. The Count is leaving the castle wearing his clothes so that people would think they saw Jonathan in Bistritz. But not only that, they would see him taking children or people for whatever wicked ways the Count does. And Jonathan would be blamed for it because the Count is in his clothes. He would be treated like a criminal, but even worse, he wouldn't even get a fair trial. He left and sat back on a sofa somewhere outside his room, and some dust particles started dancing around him in strange ways. It was strangely soothing to him. They then began to dance in a way that made them look like people. He then realized he's getting hypnotized somehow to fall asleep. The women then appear from the dust particles again, and Jonathan quickly rushes back to his room. As he starts to calm down, he hears a woman screaming. He looks out the window and sees a woman in the courtyard screaming, "You monster! You stole my child!" Jonathan looks out and comes to the conclusion that she must be the mother of the child that was in that bag the other day. Jonathan backs up from the window and then he hears a bunch of wolves howling, then screaming from the woman again, and then nothing. He doesn't even want to look back out the window. He knows what happened. He then starts to get scared yet again. June 25th. Jonathan's resolve hardens and he thinks he has to get to the Count's room, because the Count has to have a key to the front door. He also figures that he's never seen the Count during the day, so maybe the Count is awake at night and sleeps during the day. But he thinks that the room's always locked. However, he does know a way. He's seen the Count used this way several times. Jonathan says he has no choice. He has to scale the cobblestones on the wall of the castle himself. He says that this is his last entry. He loves Mina and wishes her well. He returns later to tell of what happened. He says after he wrote that, he left his room from the window and somehow he didn't feel dizzy or sick as he climbed the wall. Maybe because he was so determined. He managed to get down to the Count's room, and when he entered it, he became confused. The Count was nowhere to be seen. There was a few things of furniture, but they were all covered in dust. However, there was a pile in the corner of gold and jewels of all countries' origins. He makes note of this, but then sees another door. It's unlocked, and when he opens it, he sees a strange sight. A stone spiral staircase going down. It's dark, and the only light comes from the torches on the wall. He descends until he gets to a weird chapel and graveyard inside the castle. He walks inside the chapel and sees a horrifying sight. Tons of coffins, one of which has the Count lying in it. He looks almost dead, but he is decidedly not. His eyes are open and seem furious, but he does not move. Jonathan wonders if he can see him, but the Count seems unconscious. Jonathan looks closer for the keys, but the Count's eyes look so hateful. And Jonathan notices that the Count has no heartbeat and no pulse. Jonathan gets scared and quickly retreats back up the stairs, goes back on the wall on the cobblestones, and climbs back to his room. June 29th. Jonathan says, today is the day that his last letter will be sent. He knows that the Count is going to post it himself, as he saw him lizard his way out of his window again, in Jonathan's clothes again, at that. Jonathan, worried about his fate, goes back to his library and falls asleep there, which I guess is a part of his room, so it doesn't count? I don't know. He is awoken by the Count, who says, tomorrow, they are to part. He's going to let Jonathan go home. He has summoned a carriage for him tomorrow morning, to which he will be returned to Bistritz and then to London. Jonathan, slightly alarmed, says he would rather go today, like right now. To his surprise, the Count says he doesn't mind that. So, come on, Jonathan, let's go. They go down the stairs, and the Count makes a weird motion with his hand. And then wolves start howling, loudly. They continue, and Jonathan gets scared. The Count opens the front door slightly, and wolves put their snouts in and snarl and howl, and start biting the air towards Jonathan. Jonathan freaks out and tells the Count, while crying, mind you, tomorrow, fine, okay, tomorrow. They return to the library, and the Count kisses Jonathan's right hand goodnight. During the sleepless night, Jonathan hears something outside his door, and he puts his ear up to it. It's womanly giggles. He figures it's those women from earlier. He hears, or rather feels, Dracula appear on the other side of the door. Back! Back! Tonight he is mine. You can have him tomorrow. Jonathan goes back to bed, ready to die. Oh my god! Jonathan goes back to his bed, ready to die, and as he panics, he eventually falls asleep, and nothing happens. June 30th. Jonathan awakes and finds he's not dead. He's elated and rushes out of his room, but is horrified to find the front door is now locked. He knows that he has to leave now. If he doesn't, he will die tonight to those women. He knows the Count has the keys, so he scales out his window again across the wall and then goes down the staircase in the Count's room, noting the gold in the corner again, and when he gets to the chapel at the bottom of the staircase, he finds the Count's coffin is shut. He opens it and is horrified at what he sees. The Count has blood all over his mouth, but that's not all. His hair is no longer white, but now salt and pepper. His cheeks fuller and his lips redder, as if he were younger somehow. Frustrated and wanting to do something, Jonathan takes a nearby shovel and slams it down on the Count, but it only hits his forehead, leaving a small gash. As Jonathan looks back at him, the Count is still alive. His mouth bears a wicked grin now, however. Jonathan quickly runs back up the stairs and scales back to his room. He hears a bunch of people enter the castle, and Jonathan figures it's the Count's servants. It's gotta be somehow. He hears them enter, nail something down, and then lock a door. Jonathan figures he's dead. He's got no chance. His only hope is to scale down the wall and get out of the castle that way. Somehow. He has no choice. He says if he doesn't, those women will kill him and drink his blood. So he says Mina is a woman. Those things are not women. He says he's going to steal some gold before he goes, in case he actually escapes. He ends all of his journals by saying, goodbye, Mina. Goodbye, all. The next chapter cuts to Mina, the fiancée of Jonathan Harker, who, fun fact, is named after the Deadlocked character. This comment is bait, and some of you will still comment about it. It shows a few letters between Mina and her friend Lucy, starting on May 9th. The first letter is Mina saying that her fiancé, Jonathan Harker, is out on business, and she's learning how to write well so she can help him. She is a schoolmistress at this time, and she mentions that she heard Lucy, her best friend, has a new gentleman she's with, a tall man with curly hair. On May 29th, Lucy replies. She talks about how Mina is mistaken. The tall man is a friend. However, she has had 3 marriage proposals in one day recently. The first one was an insane asylum director, a powerful man named John Seward, and the second proposal was a very stereotypical cowboy from Texas named Quincy Morris. The third, however, she accepted the proposal of, and that man is named Arthur Holmwood. After this, it cuts to a journal entry from John Seward, one of the suitors. He says he can't eat or sleep after the rejection of Lucy, so he'll write in this journal about work. He says he is an insane asylum director, and in this asylum there's a man with a certain, quote, sanguine temperament, who has an immense physical strength and thirst for blood. Right after this is a letter from Quincy, the cowboy, and he sends it to Arthur Holmwood, the man that Lucy did decide to marry, and he says he just wants to talk to him. July 24th, quite a big time skip. Mina travels to the north of England, a place called Whitby. There, she meets up with her friend Lucy, and they talk a bit about marriage and the likes of it. They sit near a beautiful abbey, but it's very old and dilapidated. They sit on this bench, and 3 old men sit near them as they talk. Mina and Lucy talk, and Mina says that she's getting kind of worried, actually, because she hasn't heard from her Jonathan in almost a month. Lucy says she has to go home, and then the old men near Mina sit on a bench next to her and continue to talk. One of them, a man named Mr. Swalles, says he's nearly 100 years old. He recounts a story about the ocean and how it's unforgiving, and he's seen many a men die on it. About 6 o'clock, he looks around, gets up, and says he has to get going. August 1st. Mina and Lucy go to the same place at Whitby this day, and the old men are once again chatting. Lucy and Mina talk about marriage again, and the old man then comes over and says, "Let me tell you guys a story. Don't you think graves are funny? Graveyards?" Mina asks, "What's he mean?" And the old man says, "There's a grave nearby of a young man." He then asks, "Young lady, who do you think graves are for? The dead or the relatives of the dead?" Mina says she supposes the relatives. The old man says, "That's right. The kid in that grave ended his own life. And on that grave it says he left behind a grieving mother who is also a widow. His grave is right next to where they're sitting right now." Lucy gets up and she says, "I wish you didn't tell me that." She doesn't want to sit near the grave of a victim of suicide. The old man says, "Oh, she doesn't know the half of it. The young man took his own life because of his mother that is written on that grave. She was horrible, and now she is immortalized as a poor old woman on that grave. It was against the young man's wishes at that." The old man then leaves Lucy and Mina. Then they just go back to talking about marriage. Lucy goes on and on about how happy she is and how she's going to marry Arthur and it's going to be amazing. It makes Mina sick to think about her Jonathan and how he has not talked to her or maybe even left her. Then after this conversation, they leave. Mina comes back to the same spot later to cry about how she misses Jonathan quite dearly. The next few pages after that are from John Seward again. He says that there's a man that he's been studying, one in his insane asylum with a thirst for blood, and this man is very interesting. He has a habit of catching flies. Seward wonders why, but he spoke to the man about it, and this man spoke quite eloquently, and he seems quite normal, despite the fact that he has probably killed people. Seward observes him, and he feeds these flies he catches to a spider. This man seems to have a fascination with the spiders as he feeds the flies to them. Seward talks to this man yet again, who we find out is named Renfield. And Renfield the next day seems to have moved up the food chain and has now been having fun with sparrows. Lots of them. Seward notes how his patient can love animals so much and be so misanthropic at the same time. The day after this, Renfield asks Seward for a favor. He wants a kitten, a baby cat. Seward asks, "Why?" And Renfield only says, "Please, sir, my sanity depends on it." Seward is hesitant and says, "Maybe another time." after which Renfield sulks in his room all day. The next day, he comes back to find Renfield chewing on his own fingers in the corner, seemingly mad. Even worse, a nurse comes up to him and says that Renfield has a ton of feathers around him in that corner, the belief being that he ate all the sparrows that he was playing with. Seward now knows that he was right not to give that man a kitten. However, his scientific mind almost begs that he does give him a kitten and see what the man will do. He'll eat it, obviously, but where will he go from there? Renfield then goes back to catching flies in the corner again. Seward says he just has to focus on his work and not think about the failed proposal to Lucy. He must focus. So he dubs Renfield a new medical term called zoophagous, or one who absorbs life from animals. It then returns to Mina's journal. She says how she misses Jonathan so much. However, she has gotten a few letters from him, but they are worded very strangely, as if they were not written by him. However, the letters are in his handwriting, so it must be him. She got them from his boss, a man named Hawkins. A few days later, on the 27th of July, Mina continues that she has gotten no more letters from Jonathan, and she is horribly scared about him. In other news, however, Lucy, whom Mina lives with apparently, has begun sleepwalking. Mina's heard rumors about people who sleepwalk, and it can be dangerous. And Lucy says she's worried about it herself, but her father has had the same problem in his lifetime. Her soon-to-be husband, Arthur, is also leaving for a bit because his father is gravely ill. On the 6th of August, she says that she wants to go back with Lucy to the bench in Whitby near the Abbey. When they both sit down, they see the old man, Mr. Swallows. He starts to walk over to them, and he looks dreadful and sorrowful, not like the man before it all that was talking about the grave. The old guy walks up and sits down and says, "Ma'am, I'm sorry for the way I acted lately, talking so casually about death and being so skeptical about it all. I can see it caused you both distress." Mina says it's perfectly okay, she's fine, but the old man says no. He just uses humor and speaks of death as if it's nothing, but in truth it's a coping mechanism. He is somewhat scared of death. He's almost 100 years old and he feels like death will visit him very soon. However, he knows that death is the only thing in life that is constant for everyone. The world is always shifting and changing, and death is the only constant. After which he stands up and shakes Mina's hand, and they both look out at the sea. A coast guard comes by, and they both look over at the ocean again. There seems to be a large storm on the horizon, and on the water there is a huge boat. A Russian one, Mr. Swallows says. He says he doesn't know why, but he feels like that boat will be important sometime soon. The next chapter starts with 2 articles about the storm that happened the night after the last chapter. It is said that the storm was horrifying, yet beautiful, so much so that people may even paint it someday. However, stranger than the horrible storm is the fact that a Russian ship known as the Demeter washed up on shore, and weirdly, there was no crew. It's as if they disappeared. On board, however, a dog runs into the woods as soon as it hits the shore. Not only that, dozens of wooden crates or coffins were on board as well, which they are delivered to a solicitor. That's not even the weirdest part though. The captain of the crew was tied to the wheel of the ship, dead. He was tied by a rope and his arms were broken at weird angles, but he was clutching a rosary or crucifix. Even stranger still, he's been dead for 2 days, long before the storm even started. According to the coroner, the storm could not have killed him. Also on board was a log of the ship, which is haunting. In this log, the crew kept saying they saw a man that didn't belong to the crew walking around. Eventually, when they searched for him, it went all backwards and everyone disappeared. The newspaper article after says it was truly a mystery of the sea, and the dog who ran to the woods was never found. The captain will have a funeral tomorrow. It then goes back to Mina's journal. August 8th. Mina says the storm last night was fierce, and she woke up several times because of it. Surprisingly, though, Lucy did not. She sleepwalked twice through it, and Mina had to help her on both occasions. She's just glad that Jonathan wasn't on the water when that storm happened. But then she thinks, he might have been. She doesn't know where Jonathan is. She hopes he wasn't on the water. August 10th. Mina and Lucy go to the funeral for the captain. They said it was beautiful and lots of people were there. Among them, there was a lot of sailors. During the service, there was a dog who started barking, howling really, like it was a cat hissing at something. Its owner tried to calm it down, but it kept barking. Its owner then took it and kicked the poor dog and threw it by its scruff onto the ground. It cowered and looked sad. Lucy and Mina both felt horrible for the dog, and Mina says that Lucy is somewhat of an empath. She feels heavily for others, and she will no doubt dream of this horrible encounter of that poor dog tonight. But Mina doesn't want her to sleepwalk again, so they're going to try to go on a long walk to tire Lucy out. Around 11 p.m., Mina says they went for their walk and it was a lot of fun, but it was very tiring. They saw some cows, and they got chased by them and had fun. After which they got dinner and ate so much that it would make other women blush. Once they got home, they were tired, but Lucy's mother was there and had a young gentleman guest over who wanted to have dinner with all of them. Mina is mad at this because she just wanted to go to bed, and she says someday she hopes that a new type of guest gets invented and sees when their hosts are tired and will leave on time. Ain't that the truth, Mina? 125 years since this book was written, and that still has not happened. After the man finally leaves, they go to bed, and Mina says that Lucy looks so beautiful when she sleeps. She can understand why Arthur chose her. Then, she says that she doesn't think Lucy will sleepwalk tonight. It seems to be getting better. About 4 hours later, Mina says Lucy sleepwalked again. Mina fell asleep soon after the last entry that she wrote, but awoke soon after, unable to get back to sleep. When she looked around, Lucy was gone again. She ran out of the house and looked all over for Lucy, and although thankfully no one seemed to be roaming around the town tonight, Lucy was also nowhere to be seen. Mina thinks that maybe Lucy sleepwalked to the bench on that cliff they go to all the time. She runs up, and in the distance she sees the bench, and near it an extremely white figure lay on it, seemingly asleep, and a huge dark figure over her. Mina thinks that the white figure must be Lucy. She runs as fast as she can to the cliff. She runs so hard that she was ragged of breath and her heart was beating and her sides hurt. She got up there and sees the dark figure has 2 red eyes. She has to turn a bend and loses sight of Lucy and the figure for half of a second. She screams out, "Lucy! Lucy!" And when she sees her again, the dark figure's gone. The moonlight has broken and lights up Lucy in the pale light. Mina quickly runs over to Lucy and she's shivering badly. Mina takes out a scarf or a shawl and wraps it around Lucy's neck and sticks a pin in it so it doesn't move. Lucy, however, stays asleep, and Mina tries to lead her back home while she sleepwalks. Lucy shivers and seems not very healthy. Mina hopes she's okay. And when they get back, she puts Lucy to sleep and she looks more peaceful than ever. About 12 hours later, Mina and Lucy go out, and Mina says that she must have messed up last night because Lucy has 2 pinpricks around her neck. She figures she messed up putting the safety pin in when she put the shawl on her, and because of that, she ruined her own nightgown. Later tonight, though, they're going to try to go out with some friends and then head back. She figures Lucy will sleep soundly tonight. 10 hours later, Mina says she was wrong. Again, Lucy had a restless night and tried to sleepwalk away from their room twice, but now Mina keeps the key tied to her hand, so she can't get out. The next 2 days, Mina says that Lucy continues to try to sleepwalk but can no longer leave the room. So she goes to the window, and as she sleepwalks up to it, she talks to a bird or something she sees in the windowsill. August 14th. Mina says that her and Lucy went back to the cliff with their bench. Lucy seems just as fond of it as Mina. They really like this bench and this cliff. However, Lucy seems more lethargic lately, almost sick. As they approach the bench this day, Lucy screams out something weird. "His eyes! They're as red as last time!" Mina has no idea what this means, but when she looks at the bench, a man is on it, and for a second, his eyes look like they're aflame with fury, but it's just a reflection of the windows of the church. Seeing that there's already a man at the bench, they just return home and eat dinner. Lucy says she has a headache and goes to bed immediately after dinner's over. Mina leaves the house for a bit, and when she comes back, she sees Lucy at her window talking to that bird or whatever it is again. Mina raises her handkerchief as to say hi, but Lucy doesn't seem to notice her. She's sleepwalking again, apparently. August 17th. Mina says that Lucy's condition has worsened quite a bit. She fears that she is to blame because of the pinpricks around her neck are almost veiny and white, like there's an infection. She has horrible headaches and she seems very sick. Mina says she's going to write to some doctors tomorrow if the condition has not improved. The next part of the book is a letter, or receipt rather, of orders from the Demeter to deliver the crates to the Carfax estate, which is obviously Dracula's estate in England that he bought from Jonathan when he was in the castle. After the receipts, Mina gets a letter on the 19th, one saying that Jonathan is alive. He's come down with something called a brain fever. He's in a hospital in Budapest. How he got there is unknown, and the nurses put him in a hospital. He raves about blood and poison and weird things. This letter advises Mina to get to Budapest to see him to either take care of him or take him home if he feels better. Mina is obviously elated that her fiancé is alive. She says tomorrow she will leave Lucy and head to Budapest. After this, it goes back to Dr. Seward's journal. In it, he mentions how recently, Renfield has been even weirder than normal. He is strangely rude to all the orderlies of the asylum. When before he was always a psychopath, he was still kind and well composed. Now he is strangely mean. He only says, "I care not for you, the master's at hand." Seward obviously doesn't know what this means and attributes it to a weird cult or something. Or better yet, just the ravings of a madman. Seward watches him for a while and he becomes more and more agitated, saying things like, "The bride maidens rejoice, the eyes that await the coming of the bride," while once again, Seward considers this just the ravings of a madman again. Afterwards, Seward says he's actually been having trouble sleeping lately, but he has a drug that will put him to sleep, but he must not make a habit of using it. So tonight, he'll just try to fall asleep normally. He hopes he actually can. A few hours later, he writes in his journal saying he's glad he didn't take the drug, because as he was tossing and turning in his bed, a watchman came and knocked on his door. Seward opened it and the watchman says that Renfield escaped his cell. Seward puts on clothes and as they run to the cell, he asks the watchman what happened. The watchman says that he heard metal being torn from the window or breaking or something, so he checked on the cell and Renfield had jumped out the window. The bars were moved. They both run to the cell and Seward jumps out the window because it's only a short drop. The watchman waits for him and says that the madman ran towards that estate over there, the Carfax estate, the neighboring one. They both run there and find Renfield banging on a big door to the estate, screaming, "I'm here to do your bidding, master! I'm your slave!" But the door didn't open. The watchman and Seward rip Renfield away and put him in a padded cell with a straitjacket. As they do, Renfield screams and begs for his master to be patient. Seward once again says that Renfield must have gone mad yet again. A couple days later, Mina arrives in Budapest. She writes to Lucy and they both share letters back and forth. Mina states that when she got here to Budapest at the hospital, Jonathan looked very sickly. Even worse, he has some sort of amnesia. He can't seem to remember the past 6 or so months. He has no memory of the castle, or Count Dracula, or anything. However, he still has his journal. However, Jonathan is quite aware that some sort of trauma must have caused this brain fever. He knows that whatever the trauma was, it was recorded in his own journal and he refuses to read it again. Mina eyes the journal for a bit, but Jonathan sends her away when she does. He then has a change of heart and tells her to come back. Mina can read the journal if she wants, but never let him know what it says. He does not wish to be reminded of it and fall back into the brain fever. The nurse comes in the room and says that when they found Jonathan, he raved like a madman about things that are so unspeakable that she even refuses to talk about them, not even to Mina. Mina then takes the journal and says that they should be married. She doesn't ever want to be apart from Jonathan again. Jonathan agrees, and then goes to sleep. Mina tells this to the nurse, and then they get permission from the hospital chapel to get married the next day. The next morning, they are wed, and as a symbol of Mina's devotion to Jonathan, she refuses to ever read his journal. She seals it with wax, and promises Jonathan that it is a symbol that she trusts him completely. She will never open the journal unless some dire circumstance makes her. Mina seems to be very happy after this, and she writes to Lucy saying she hopes Lucy's well. She now knows why she was so happy about marriage. Lucy replies with a letter that she is so happy for Mina. She says that Arthur has returned and she feels so much better. She thinks that the brisk air will help Jonathan get better as well, as it helped her. She then says that Arthur says she's getting fat though, but she's to be married to him in 1 month's time. It then goes back to Seward's journal, and he says that Renfield is once again being strange. He keeps repeating the words, "I can't wait. I can't wait," though Seward has no idea what he cannot wait for. But Renfield seems to have calmed down since that last night. Seward sees him in the straitjacket and says that he seems calmer, and he takes him out and lets him go back to his cell. The orderlies tell Seward that it's a bad idea, but Seward says that he's the boss and they do what he says. When the dawn returns the next day, Renfield once again becomes violent. But it seems that he becomes docile at night, but violent during the day. Seward has an idea after this. They will let him escape next time and see what Renfield does. That night they try it, but he's docile as a mouse. Even when Seward asks, "Do you want a cat?" But he doesn't even reply. So they leave Renfield alone. But after they all do that, sure enough, he escapes. but they already have watchmen ready for him. They chase him once again back to the estate. However, a large bat flies straight away from the estate and Renfield looks up at it before he gets there, and immediately becomes pacified. Seward notes that the bat is flying quite strangely and is huge, but it just seems to be a normal bat. When they grab Renfield, he just says, "I'll go quietly. I promise, don't put me back in the straitjacket." After this, Lucy herself starts her own journal. She says she should do what Mina does and write down her thoughts to recount later. She likes that idea. She says she's had terrible nightmares lately, and she's starting to feel sick again. However, at night, she hears scratching at her window and can never figure out what it is. Immediately after, we see letters from Arthur, Lucy's fiancé, to Dr. Seward of all people, the man that Lucy denied in favor of him. They know each other from this, and strangely, Arthur begs Dr. Seward to come help her, because Lucy has started becoming even sicker, and he knows him at least. He thinks that she's anemic or something, but there has to be an underlying cause. Arthur begs Seward to meet Lucy for lunch soon, and don't tell her mother that she is sick, because her mother herself is sick and on death's door, and this might just be the final nail in the coffin. Seward writes back a day later and says he will go there tomorrow and do that. A few days after, Seward writes a letter back to Arthur. He says he went, and when he got there, Lucy seemed in good spirits and was putting on a brave face, but when her mother and the servants left, Lucy fell to the floor sick. Seward said that he examined her quite thoroughly and even tested her blood, but it really seemed like there was nothing wrong with her at all, at least from the tests. Seward says he's stumped. However, he has an idea. His old teacher, a man by the name of Abraham Van Helsing, who lives in Amsterdam, might have an idea. This is my favorite character, by the way. But this Abraham Van Helsing is extremely famous and knows all about strange diseases and the like. Seward says that he will write to his teacher Van Helsing and beg him to come over to see if he can figure out what's wrong with Lucy. After all, even though she rejected him, Seward still cares for her. After this, Seward writes a letter to Van Helsing and he replies nearly instantly. He writes back that he's already on his way by the time that Seward is reading this letter. He speaks and writes very strangely, almost like he's really excited and giddy, or perhaps he's just a really strange guy. He's a metaphysicist, a doctor, a philosopher, and a bunch of other things. He knows both folklore and superstition as well as modern medicine. Soon after, Seward writes to Arthur what happened when Van Helsing got there. They all sat down, and once again, Lucy put on a brave face when Van Helsing appeared, despite being sick. Van Helsing looks over Lucy a bit with Seward watching. Van Helsing then strangely says, well, it makes sense why Seward didn't know what was wrong with you. He is a man and knows nothing of young women. He doesn't have a wife or a daughter or anything, but lucky for you, I am an old man who knows women. Dr. Seward, if you would, leave us alone for a bit. Seward, although being annoyed at this, does so and waits for Van Helsing to finish. After the examination is over, Van Helsing says he's going to go home and think about what is wrong. He really needs to think about this because he isn't quite sure, other than the fact that she has lost a lot of blood and she's anemic. So Van Helsing leaves and writes to Seward that tell him if Lucy's condition worsens in any way. If it does, he'll be right back. Seward says after this he goes back to work at the asylum and he'll check on Lucy later. He goes back to his asylum to see Renfield, who is playing with his flies yet again. Seward asks how he's doing, and Renfield says he wants more sugar, so he can have some as well as his flies. Seward doesn't see why not and gives him the sugar. Later, around sunset, Seward checks in on Renfield again, only to see him throwing all of his flies in a box out of the window. Seward asks, why do you do that? And his only reply was, I'm sick of playing with flies and shit. Seward then goes back to Lucy and sees that she is doing better after a few days, but then out of nowhere, her health plummets to worse than it ever was. He writes letters to both Van Helsing and Arthur, her fiancé, about this. After he writes them, he heads to Lucy's house immediately. Van Helsing is already back there somehow, and Lucy's mother figured out she was sick on her own, so they don't need to keep it from her anymore at least. Before Van Helsing and Seward go into Lucy's room though, they talk for a second. They speak and Van Helsing says he's had a few thoughts about this disease that she has. And Seward asks, well, what are they? And he says he's going to keep it to himself for now, just in case. Van Helsing then gives an analogy about corn, which is so weird that even Seward is like, brother, what the fuck are you talking about? But Van Helsing just says, note everything down about Lucy. Nothing's too small. They head up to the room and they tell Lucy's mother that she should not be present just in case the sight is too ghastly, that it shocks their mother into an early grave. They both enter, and Lucy looks even worse than Seward remembers. She is gaunt, extremely pale, and sickly looking. They notice 2 marks on her throat as well and wonder if that has something to do with this, but they just note it for now. Van Helsing's face becomes serious, and he tells Seward to leave the room with him for a minute. Lucy doesn't even have the strength to speak. They leave, and Van Helsing says they need to perform a blood transfusion immediately. He says that Seward's younger, therefore he should be the one whose blood Lucy gets. Seward just agrees, but as he does, Arthur barges in and says he must see Lucy if she is as bad as Seward says. Van Helsing is very annoyed at this, but then he has an idea. He says that Arthur actually might just be able to save his girlfriend, and Seward won't have to do anything. All Arthur needs to do is to help them. Arthur says he would give every last drop to save his fiancée if he can. Van Helsing smiles and says, well, we won't take the last drop of your blood, just most of it. Seward thinks that Van Helsing must think he's very funny. They explain the procedure to Arthur and he agrees. They go in and start the transfusion, and as they do, Lucy begins to look slightly better, but Arthur begins to look very sick from how much blood they're taking from him. After they finish, Van Helsing says Arthur may give Lucy 1 kiss, maybe 2. Arthur does so and then leaves to rest on his own. Van Helsing says that although she looks a bit better, Seward should watch over her tonight as she sleeps. Seward agrees, and Van Helsing says he still doesn't really know what's going on with her yet, but he's going to go back to Amsterdam and read some books about all of this, and he'll be back in a couple days. He leaves, and that night, Seward watches over Lucy, and she seems to try and keep her eyes open and not sleep. Seward asks why is she doing that, and she explains that she has horrible nightmares, especially lately, and she's afraid to sleep. Seward says he promises that he will wake her if he sees her stir or have a nightmare. She thanks him and then immediately falls asleep. The whole night, Lucy sleeps peacefully. In the morning, Seward goes home and thinks about Renfield and wonders what's wrong with him. But as he goes back to Lucy's house the following night, when he gets there, Lucy seems to be much better, and she's even talking. Seward says he's here to watch over her again tonight, but Lucy says, no, it's okay, he can sleep tonight, she feels fine. She'll watch over him. Seward for some reason agrees to this, and she says that if she feels sick, she'll wake him up and he can take over. They eat dinner, and Seward finally goes to sleep after 2 nights of not sleeping. Lucy then says how much better she feels, and she doesn't know why, but she feels closer to Arthur for no reason. A few hours later, Van Helsing arrives in the early morning and Seward gets woken up by him. He asks, how's Lucy doing? And Seward says, better, but he fell asleep. They go and check on her, and Van Helsing gasps. Lucy looks even worse than before. Van Helsing quickly gets his transfusion kit out and tells Seward that there is no time now. Arthur's not here. You're going to have to be the donor this time. Seward agrees quickly and they get to it. After a while, Van Helsing says, alright, that's enough. Seward says he can keep going, but Van Helsing says no, he took a lot of blood from Seward. He's going to get sick if he does. He gave even more than Arthur did. A sense of pride then comes over Seward and he thinks, I gave more blood to her than her fiancé did. But Van Helsing says that she looks a little better, at least. But Seward should go home and eat and rest. He'll watch over Lucy tonight. Seward says if Van Helsing is sure about it, alright. And then he leaves. The next day, Seward goes back and Van Helsing is still there, and Lucy looks barely better. And Van Helsing greets Seward. As Lucy lies there, Van Helsing pulls out some flowers, and Lucy says, aw, that's so kind of him to bring flowers. She sniffs them and says, why do they smell like that? This is just garlic, it's not even good flowers. Van Helsing snaps for some reason and says, my dear, I do not joke, I need you to hold them. He says for Seward to help him rub the garlic on everything, and they do, covering the whole room in a garlicky smell. Seward asks, what is this about? But Van Helsing just says he has a hunch that they can both leave Lucy tonight and she will be fine. Seward won't have to give Lucy any more blood either. Lucy blushes and asks what did she do to deserve such wonderful friends. Seward wonders what Van Helsing means by they don't have to watch over her tonight, and a vague dread comes over him. Night falls, and then the next day the two come back and Lucy's mother tells them that she threw away all the garlic because it made the room stuffy. Van Helsing goes pale and they both rush to the room where Lucy is, and she once again looks horrible. This time Van Helsing gives blood while Seward watches. Van Helsing then tells Lucy's mother that those herbs were medicinal, don't throw them away next time. 4 days pass and Lucy writes in her diary that she's feeling much better after that, and she doesn't hear the flapping at her window anymore, even though it does smell like garlic all over. After this, a newspaper article from a zoo that states a wolf has escaped, a rather large one at that. That night, Seward is at his office in the asylum and thinks about Lucy when, out of nowhere, Renfield rushes in his office with a dinner knife. It's unknown how he got out of his cell or even got a knife. Renfield rushes at Seward, and although Seward tries to defend himself, Renfield is too strong. He slices Seward's wrist, and although he's hurt, Seward gets a good haymaker into Renfield's face. Renfield falls on the ground, and blood is dripping from Seward's wrist. Although Renfield is stuck on the ground, reeling, he bends to lick up the blood of Seward's wrist, saying, "Blood, beautiful blood, it's life." Seward sees that Renfield's not going to attack him again, so he tries to dress his own wound while Renfield is just licking the floor. The orderlies then run in and grab Renfield, and Seward thinks that he needs to rest because he's lost so much blood already, and this does not help. He just hopes that Van Helsing doesn't tell him to go over to Lucy's tonight. But Lucy hasn't written to him recently, so he assumes she's fine now. Immediately after, a letter comes from Van Helsing to Seward saying that he needs to go to Lucy's tonight to watch over her. However, the letter arrives late, and Seward was already asleep when it arrived. He does not see it. In the night, Lucy writes in her journal that she has to write all of this down. She might die as she writes it, though. A few hours ago, she felt really cold, and her mother came in her room saying that she was cold too. They snuggled up next to each other, and as soon as her mother gets in bed with her daughter, the window shatters and a gray wolf barges in barking. Her mother grabs the garlic from Lucy's neck and then grasps at her chest and has a heart attack. The maids rush in and start to freak out about seeing a dead body, and Lucy tells them to go to the kitchen and drink some wine to calm down, and the wolf runs away. Lucy tries to stand up after this, and then faints after seeing her mother seemingly died right in front of her right there. The maids in the other room faint from the wine for some reason. September 18th. Seward rushes to the house in the early morning, and Van Helsing is already there asking, "Why did you just get here, Seward?" Seward says that he got the letter early in the morning and he was asleep when he got it. They figure it might be too late, but they must get to Lucy really fast. They can't get in the front door, so they find a way in the window and see a bunch of maids passed out and medicine near a wine bottle. They've been drugged. They then rush to Lucy's room and freak out with what they see. Lucy's mother is dead, clutching the garlic, and Lucy looks even worse than they've ever seen her. Her neck wound is disgusting and white. They get Lucy to a bigger bedroom away from her mother and tear the diary away from her chest. Van Helsing reads through it, and they bring Lucy to the master bedroom to lie her down. They need to figure out a way to give her another transfusion, but neither of them can do it right now. They can't trust the maids because they were drugged as well. As they say this, a knock comes at the door. Van Helsing annoyedly answers it and sees it's Quincy, who is the cowboy that Lucy rejected all that time ago. Quincy says that Arthur told him to come over because he couldn't today and his father was sick again. Seward and Van Helsing say, "Thank God he's here. They're going to need him to give a transfusion to Lucy." Quincy says in his stereotypical cowboy accent that he'd be happy to help. Seward says he doesn't want to talk about the procedure again because he's already described it so much, so he says that they just do the transfusion and it was a success, although not nearly as successful as the other times. Lucy stirs uncomfortably as the transfusion is given, but she is alive and slightly better than she was. When the transfusion is over, they raise the maids from their sleep. Quincy then walks up to Seward and asks, "What's going on?" He heard from Arthur that all three of them have given Lucy a transfusion, and now he needed to give her one as well? What's going on? Seward doesn't want to tell him, but it seems that Quincy already knows most of the story, so he just says, "It's as you say, Quincy. Something is terribly wrong with Lucy." Quincy says, he loves the woman. He never will get to marry her, sure, but he wants to make sure he can help her in any way he can. Seward says, well, he might just be needed sometime. Van Helsing comes down and gives Seward the journal to read, and as he does, he asks Van Helsing what all of it means. Van Helsing gravely says that Seward's gonna know soon. Very soon. Lucy wakes up a while later and she sees her mother in her journal and knows that her mom is gone. She wails and cries horribly, but all three men say that they're gonna stay with her and help her in any way they can after this horrible period of time. They'll handle the death certificate and the funeral arrangements. Lucy seems to calm down a bit after, however tears up the last few pages of her own journal. September 20th. Seward gets a letter from one of his co-workers at the asylum. It says that Renfield did some weird things again. He escaped after calling an old man some names and ran up to a convoy of workers transporting wooden crates. Renfield attacked them and they could not fight back. It took several big men to restrain Renfield. The whole time he was crying out, "My master, no!" But eventually they put him back in his cell. After this, we actually hear from Mina again, who writes to Lucy, having no idea what's happening to her. Mina says that her and Jonathan are on their way back to London. Even better, Jonathan's boss, Hawkins, is making him a partner in the business. The two will be pretty much equals, and they'll get a lot more money. Mina says she can't wait to see Lucy again when she gets a chance to go into town. Back at Lucy's house in the morning, Van Helsing, Arthur, and Seward all watch over Lucy, whose condition is fast deteriorating. Her breathing is labored, and her gums have receded into her mouth, giving her teeth long and sharp appearance. Seward notes that her canines look even more pointed. Van Helsing takes note that, strangely, Lucy clutches the garlic when she's awake and instinctively wants to push it away when she sleeps. They watch over her, and Van Helsing notes that it's not going to be long now. From how she looks, she's not going to make it much longer. They remove the cloth around her neck to see that the pinpricks are gone. Van Helsing exclaims, "Mein Gott!" and tells Seward to get Arthur in the room right now. Lucy's dying. Seward gets Arthur, and when Arthur gets in, Lucy springs to life, and in a voice very different from her own, almost sexily, she says, "Arthur, my love, kiss me, now." Seward and Van Helsing are frightened by this, and Van Helsing, despite him being old, catches Arthur as he runs to Lucy by the throat and tells him, "Don't go near her." She tries to call to him once more, and as if a spell gets put over Arthur, he tries to run to her again, only to be stopped by Van Helsing again. Van Helsing says he can kiss her hand and that's it. Don't go near her face. Arthur is confused, and he does so, and Lucy then finally, after Arthur kisses her hand, passes away. She falls, and Seward gets Arthur out of the room and lets him break down and cry in the drawing room. It's so sad that Seward himself almost cries. But he needs to leave Arthur time to grieve alone, so he goes back to Van Helsing. He notes how that now that Lucy's dead, her body looks almost more beautiful than when she was alive, as if the death returned her beauty. Seward says, "It's over. Finally. At least she can rest." But Van Helsing says, "No. It's only begun." After all was said and done, they go to the funeral parlor and make sure all is ready for the two funerals. The funeral was set for tomorrow, and both mother and daughter would be set to rest together. Seward looks over her and thinks that Lucy looks strangely more beautiful in death. In his mind, he has trouble even realizing that she's a corpse at all. Van Helsing comes in and says that the solicitors needs to be called to have everything ready for tomorrow. Van Helsing then takes a gold crucifix and some garlic and stuffs them in Lucy's mouth. Seward looks at Van Helsing confused, and then he says, "Do not be alarmed, Seward. For tomorrow, after the funeral, I will cut off her head and cut out her heart." Seward can't believe what he's hearing. For this woman he once loved is to be desecrated? Van Helsing must see the look on Seward's face, and he says, "Do not look at me like that. Have you ever known me to do anything without reason? I understand why you can't see it, Seward, for your heart is bleeding, and I love you more because it bleeds. But do you not remember when she seduced Arthur in her final moments? How I had to use all my strength to stop him?" Seward says he's not sure, but Van Helsing says, "Trust me. These next few weeks are going to be very difficult for everybody. We need to work as a team." Seward nervously says, "Okay." They both say tomorrow they're going to come back here, and with the help of the solicitors, they will get everything ready for cutting off the head of Lucy and such. Van Helsing leaves before Seward does, and Seward sees one of the maids go into Lucy's room. He thinks, how thoughtful. Going to see her boss one more time to say goodbye. What a good lady that maid is. The next day, Van Helsing wakes Seward up from his sleep. He says, they have a problem. There's no longer any need to cut off Lucy's head or cut out her heart. Seward asks why, and Van Helsing lifts up the gold crucifix. He says, too late now. Or perhaps too early. Last night, a maid stole it from her body, and she wasn't purified the way she was supposed to be. The solicitors come in, and they let Seward and Van Helsing know that because Lucy and her mother are both gone, Arthur is to inherit all of their property and become a lord. Also, the maid was given over to the authorities, the one that stole the crucifix, but now they have a bigger problem. As Van Helsing talks about all this, Arthur rushes in and says, he wants to see her! They go to the death room and lift up the sheet. Seward is astonished that she's even more beautiful than he remembers. He and Arthur then leave the room and talk after. Arthur says that he knows that Seward loved Lucy and he rejected him. And Seward is truly a great man, though, for still doing all of that for her before she passed. They sob together for a minute, but then they go back to the room. Van Helsing apologizes to Arthur for grabbing him by the neck the other night, and he says that he hopes Arthur knows that he did it all for a good reason. Arthur says sadly that even though he and Lucy were not married, he feels the fact that he gave blood for her made them married in a weird way. After all of it's over, Seward then goes back to sleep on the sofa, which now technically belongs to Arthur. September 22nd. Mina writes in her journal of the strange day she had. The other day, Hawkins, Jonathan's partner in the business, died suddenly, and today they went to the funeral, and now technically the entire law firm belongs to Jonathan. The funeral was nice, and afterwards they went into town and they saw a beautiful woman. Both Jonathan and Mina look at her, and then another man walks by in front of her, looking at the beautiful woman too. The man was very tall, had a black mustache and pointy beard. When Jonathan saw this man, he gasped, and he looked very ill. Mina asks, "What's wrong with you?" And Jonathan stutters and says, Don't you know who that is? That's the Count. But he's young. What happened?" Before he can make more of a scene, Mina takes Jonathan to a nearby park and they sit down, to which Jonathan falls asleep or perhaps faints. About 20 minutes later, he gets up with no memory of what just happened. Mina resolves that she's going to have to look at the journal to figure out what happened when she gets home, because he did just mention the Count by name. She knows she said she would never look at the journal, but at this point, she feels she really has no choice, because if he keeps fainting like that, there's going to be problems. When they get home, Mina is horrified to get a telegram from a man named Van Helsing, whom she has no idea who that is. However, on the telegram, it says that Lucy and her mother have both passed away. Mina doesn't even know how to react to this. Back with Seward and Van Helsing, they talk about things after they get everyone else to leave, including Quincy, whom they say if America is filled with men like him, the country will do just fine. After they all leave, Van Helsing does something very strange. He begins laughing his ass off and at the same time, crying horribly. He switches between the two emotions over and over. Seward rightfully asks, "What the fuck's wrong with you?" And Van Helsing says that Seward has to forgive him. All of this has just gotten to him. Van Helsing says that he's just at the end of his rope. He feels that the events of these past few days have finally gotten to him. Seward then begins to feel for his old teacher, and he says, "It's okay. It's over now, Van Helsing." On top of it all, he doesn't think he'll have any reason to write in this journal ever again. After this, there's another strange excerpt from a newspaper. It says that there is a strange rumor going around about something called the blofer lady, and how kids keep seeing her like she's a cryptid or something, which I didn't know what blofer meant when I read this, but it's just kind of how a kid would say beautiful, so it's a blofer woman, a beautiful woman, anyway. In the stories, after the kids see this woman and tell their parents, the kids disappear and go missing, like it's a boogeyman or something. After which, they usually find the kids that have gone missing, and they usually have strange marks on their neck. Even worse, the sightings happen near a cemetery where Lucy was buried. September 24th. Mina says, after she got home yesterday, she decided to read Jonathan's journal without him knowing. After she did, she was confused. She wondered if any of it could even be real. She thought maybe he contracted the brain fever before all of this and just made all of that up. She has to think about it. However, later in the day, a letter comes from Abraham Van Helsing again, and it says that he was entrusted all of Lucy's journals and letters from her fiancé, Arthur, and he read all about Mina. He wishes to meet her and discuss her husband and Lucy with Mina. After all, Mina and Lucy seem to be close. After this letter, Mina replies with one sentence, "Tomorrow at 10:15, my house." September 25th. Mina says how nervous she is to meet Van Helsing, but when he arrives, he is not at all like she pictured. He is older, he has red hair and is clean shaven, though a bit balding up top. She isn't really sure about all of this stuff, and then they sit down and Van Helsing says that Lucy talked a lot about Mina in her journals and how helpful she was during her sleepwalking incidents. And, truthfully, he doesn't know where else to get help, and Mina seemed like the best bet. Van Helsing asks if Mina can remember what happened, because a lot of young women nowadays are so forgetful. Mina thinks that was a rude comment, so she fucks with Van Helsing a bit, but eventually just gives him her journals on what happened with Lucy. Van Helsing reads them all and then strangely fawns over her, calling her a wonderful woman, the light of every man's life, and a perfect person. Mina rightfully asks, what the fuck is he talking about? And Van Helsing says He knows a lot of young women, and none of them are as well spoken or as well written as Mina. He then asks about Mina's husband. How's Jonathan? Is his brain fever gone? What was that about anyway? Mina says that if she told him, he wouldn't believe her and think she's crazy. Van Helsing says very sweetly that if she knew the past few days that he'd had, she'd call him crazy. He then asks sweetly to see the journal that Jonathan wrote. He promises nothing in the journal will surprise him. He will not think that either of them are mad. Mina, won over by his very strange charms, agrees. Van Helsing says that, thank you. You will read it tonight and send a telegram over tomorrow. And then he leaves. After this, the two send letters back and forth between each other and then weirdly find the need to trick Jonathan to see Van Helsing in the letters. Van Helsing says he's happy to say that what Jonathan said in his journals is true. Completely. He knows it. The next morning, they're going to meet, which they do meet the next morning, and Jonathan talks about it in his new journal. Jonathan says that last night, before the meeting, Mina told him all about Van Helsing and how the doctor said that what Jonathan wrote about the Count was all true. He isn't crazy after all. Jonathan says that this makes him feel like a new man entirely. He remembered everything instantly and he knows that he'll like Van Helsing. He says that when Van Helsing got there, he was very kind, and Van Helsing says that Jonathan looks very healthy. Jonathan says that Van Helsing's word of his memories being true is what cured him. Van Helsing smiles and says he's happy to hear it, but something else is terribly wrong now. He affirms what Jonathan knows. Count Dracula is in London. Dr. Seward then starts a new journal himself, saying that although he thought he was done with writing journals, here he is again, writing in one. He says that the reason is most dire, however. He says at 5 a.m. this morning, Van Helsing slammed into his room and shoved a newspaper in his face, the one about the blofer lady. Van Helsing sternly asks, what do you make of this? Huh? Seward says, it's a newspaper, what of it? He says, read the story. Seward begrudgingly does, and he says that he figures whatever bit Lucy bit the children as well, so what? Van Helsing says, there's been a lot of bats recently, yeah? Seward says, yes. So Van Helsing thinks that Lucy was bit by a bat, so what? Van Helsing says that he wants Seward to think for a second. Nay, believe for a second. There are things outside modern science's comprehension. There has to be. Think of it this way. Someone who discovered electricity would have been killed as a wizard 500 years ago. Seward rightfully asks him once again, what the fuck are you talking about? Just tell me as if I'm your student again. Van Helsing then says plainly, Lucy is the one biting the children. Van Helsing, are you mad? Seward cries out. Van Helsing says, oh no, he's quite sane and he will prove it. He wants to take Seward out tonight and go to the hospital where one of the children saw the blofer lady by. Seward asks, is that all? But then Van Helsing then produces a small key and says, no. After that, we will go to Lucy's tomb, and I will prove it to you. Seward feels sick, but knows that he has to see this through, even if it is just to prove Van Helsing wrong. They go to the hospital and see one of the children who was bitten, and sure enough, it looks the exact same as Lucy's bite marks. The doctor thinks that it's a bat bite, perhaps like a vampire bat or something. They're pretty common recently. Seward and Van Helsing then leave, and it's not nighttime yet, so they can't sneak into the cemetery, so they eat at a place called Jack's Castle, which I like to personally choose to believe that it is a 19th century White Castle, because that would be funny. And after they eat, they head to the tomb where Lucy and her mother are buried. Van Helsing opens the tomb and gives the key to Seward. They enter it, and they light a match, and it's ghastly in there. Seward asks, what's Van Helsing gonna do in here? And he says he's going to open Lucy's coffin to show Seward. This disgusts Seward, but Van Helsing is already opening it before he can say anything. And when he slides the tomb open, nothing. There's no one in it. Van Helsing says, and there you have it. Seward says, maybe a grave robber or something stole her. This proves nothing. Just then, the clock strikes 12 and they hear something outside the tomb. They go out and see something move near the street nearby. They go to see, and it's a child. Delirious, with no wound, however. They say they have to give this boy over to the police. And Van Helsing says, this proves that this is Lucy's doing. Seward says it absolutely does not. However, they can't bring the kid to the police because they'll be questioned why they were in a cemetery that late. So, they drop him off near a road with heavy traffic and move on. September 27th. The funeral for everybody was today, and it was a little after 2 p.m. when all the mourners left. Van Helsing says that he wants to now finally prove Seward that Lucy is the blofer lady. They both go back inside the tomb, now in the daytime, and Van Helsing begins to lift it. Seward knows that once again nothing's going to be there, but when Van Helsing finally gets the lid off, to his surprise, Lucy's there. Dead. However, she's even more beautiful than when she first died. Van Helsing knowingly says, "See? What corpse has been dead for 10 or so days and looks like that?" Seward can't help but somewhat believe now. "And she is the one biting the children," Van Helsing says. Seward says, "Don't push it." He's starting to believe something weird is going on now. After that, Van Helsing sees that Seward is considering it, and he says, "What I intend to do is cut off her head and stuff her mouth with garlic. She has become undead, Seward, and this is the only way to stop an undead." Seward says, "Just do what you want." Van Helsing starts doing it and then says, "Actually, I'm gonna hold off on that. What happens if Arthur comes to see her body for some reason and sees that her head is cut off? We will just be tried for desecrating a corpse with no proof. Therefore, I will wait a few nights. Let's show Arthur and Quincy this proof so that they know." Seward agrees, and they leave for the night. Van Helsing then writes a note if he should be found dead to Seward. The note says that he is going out to put garlic in all the locks so Lucy cannot get out tonight. Then he will remove it tomorrow night to make sure she is extra desperate to get blood. Though, after this he just comes home unharmed anyway. September 28th. Van Helsing, Seward, Quincy, and Arthur go to Van Helsing's hotel room. Both Quincy and Arthur ask what is this all about. The letter Van Helsing sent is very strange. But before they start fully, Van Helsing asks for their blessing to do whatever he needs to do, no matter what it is. He's an honest man, no? Quincy agrees, saying that Van Helsing's a good man. I know it. Arthur, however, says that he can't promise anything can be done. Van Helsing says, "Aye, fair enough." He will show Arthur and Quincy the truth then, though it's going to be a little harder. They're going to go to Lucy's tomb and open her coffin, and Arthur immediately stands up and says, "That's desecrating a body. No." He says Van Helsing must be kidding. When Arthur sees that Van Helsing's face is deadly serious, he sits down and asks, "Why?" Van Helsing says it would be disrespectful. Arthur is right. But if Lucy weren't actually dead, Arthur once again gets to his feet and says, "She's alive? We buried her alive?" Van Helsing says, "No, I didn't say that. She's not dead, but she's not alive either. She is in a sort of undeath." Arthur asks, "What does that even mean?" And Van Helsing says, "There are things in this world we do not yet understand." He then pauses and then gracefully just asks, "Can I cut off her head?" Arthur gets up this time again and yells angrily, "I refuse! I will not let you desecrate your corpse! Even worse, I'll kill you if you try it!" Van Helsing says, "Fair enough," but would Arthur permit him to prove that he's not mad? If he disagrees with the proof, he will gladly lay down his life for Arthur. Arthur hesitates and he says, "Fine, I'll wait and see what you mean." At 11:45 that night, they tiptoe and hop the fence into the graveyard and go into Lucy's tomb. Van Helsing starts to move the lid, and as he does, he asks Seward, "Before I do this, her body was here yesterday, right? In the daytime?" Seward simply answers, "Yes." Van Helsing then moves the heavy lid and Arthur steps forward, ghostly white. There was no body in there. Arthur hesitantly asks, "What's the meaning of this?" Quincy says, "I hate to ask, Professor, but is this a prank?" Van Helsing says he wishes. He swears by all that is holy that this is not a prank. He was here a few nights ago and put garlic on her door so she could not escape, but then today he took it away. They then all figure that they need to step outside for some fresh air for a minute and think about this. And they do. The moonlight was beautiful, and they all had a different expression on. Arthur and Seward were silent. Quincy had just accepted it coolly, like a brave man, and Van Helsing was stern. He had a job to do. Van Helsing then takes out a Eucharist and some other materials and forms them into a paste, something that even the most skeptical of their group didn't like him doing. They ask, "What is he doing?" And he says, "He's sealing the tomb with holy material." All of a sudden, they all turn and they see it. A tall white figure, dressed in funeral garb. A woman holding a child in front of her, biting into his neck. Blood leaks from her mouth, and she turns to them and stares. They could all immediately see that this is Lucy. There was a satanic fire in her eyes that scared even Van Helsing's iron nerves. She then beckoned in a seductive-like voice for Arthur. Her husband needs to leave his friends and come over to her. The voice was so spellbinding that everyone, not Arthur, almost went over there to her. Van Helsing then gets in between them and lifts a crucifix towards Lucy. She screams and retreats towards the tomb, and Van Helsing quickly asks, "Arthur, can I end her?" And Arthur cries out that Van Helsing can do it. He doesn't care. He doesn't want to see this horror anymore. Van Helsing then undoes the Eucharist paste and corners Lucy in her own tomb with the crucifix. He then seals it once more, and they all take a sigh of relief. For now, Van Helsing says they can do nothing until tomorrow afternoon, for there's a funeral here tomorrow, and they will return tomorrow after dusk. Everyone goes home, and Seward and Quincy leave the child who was bitten safely once again on the heavy traffic road. September 29th. They all return at dusk and wait until the last visitors leave before they tiptoe back in the graveyard. They then go to the tomb and see that Lucy is sleeping inside. They all look in, and Arthur asks Van Helsing if that's really Lucy, or is a demon taking her place. Van Helsing says, "Both. It is and is not Lucy." Van Helsing then goes over the plan. What they're going to do is they're going to sing a prayerful hymn together. As they do, one of them is going to take a wooden stake and drive it into Lucy's heart with all of his might. Van Helsing insinuates that Arthur should do this, giving her her final gift of rest. Arthur agrees, but seems sorrowful. They then all begin chanting, and Arthur lifts the stake up and waits to drive it in. Seward notes that he is not shaking or trembling at all. He looks heroic, mighty, like Thor with Mjolnir. He then brings the hammer down on the stake, hard. Lucy's body sputters to life, and her eyes aflame. She sputters red foam from her mouth, and Arthur does not stop. He continues to hammer in the stake until, finally, she goes limp. After it's all over, they go over to comfort Arthur, but when they look back at Lucy's body, she has returned to how she was in life, gaunt and sick-looking, which is infinitely better than the undead. Van Helsing then turns to Arthur and asks, "And now, friend, am I forgiven?" Arthur says he is much more than forgiven. No one but Van Helsing could have done this. No one could have laid her to rest but him. Van Helsing is eternally forgiven. They then leave the tomb, and the night seemed almost lighter, prettier. Van Helsing thanks his friends. This has been a horrible night, and now they are rid of a great evil, but an even greater evil looms around the corner. An even greater threat is now in London, the one who turned Lucy in the first place. He asks all of them to help him in the battle to come, them and a new man that is going to be joining them known as Jonathan Harker, one they do not know. They all then make a pact to do so, for Lucy. They will meet again in 2 nights. Seward and Van Helsing wait at the hotel, and they get a telegram from Mina saying that they're on their way today because of some important news. Van Helsing compliments Mina's kindness once again, but says that he has somewhere to be, but his friend Seward will pick her up from a train station and let her stay with him all day until they meet in a couple of days' time. Seward then goes down to meet Mina, and they both immediately recognize each other, despite never meeting. They both say that Lucy's letters described them both perfectly, and they both had read the letters, so it was kind of a funny interaction. Seward takes her to the lunatic asylum, and when they get there, Mina goes into his room and immediately recognizes a phonograph, a primitive audio recording device, but during this time when the book was written, it was cutting edge. Seward says that, he records his journal entries through voice on the phonograph sometimes. Mina says, "Oh, it's so cool." She wants to hear it work. She says, "Play the part when Lucy died." She wants to know what happened. Seward stutters and pretty much asks, "Which time?" like an idiot. But then he says, "Actually, I don't know how to listen to a specific part of a recording, so you'll just have to listen to all of it," to which Mina agrees. Seward then leaves her alone for a bit, and as he's about to call her for dinner, she comes in his room and she looks sad. Seward immediately says that he must have distressed her with that journal, but she says, no, his grief has touched her dearly. She must write it all down so their entire group may see the type of monster they are dealing with. Seward reluctantly says, fine. Mina does so, and then says how this all needs to be passed out when it's finished to everyone that they know so they know what they are up against. Seward reads a bit of all the work that she has, which includes Jonathan's journal, which this is his first time reading it, and then he realizes it. Carfax estate. The one that Renfield keeps going to. It's the exact one that the Count purchased from Jonathan Harker. How foolish he thinks he is, not realizing that the greatest enemy lived just next door to the asylum. He wonders if the fact that Renfield is so close to his master is what's causing all these outbursts within him. He must talk to Renfield about it soon. Jonathan, however, goes to search all of the coffins that were delivered to Carfax. After that, Arthur and Quincy arrive a day early. Mina goes up to Arthur and says that she read all of Seward's journal, or listened to it rather, and she knows what horrors they've endured. She says that she was like a sister to Lucy, and if he needs to, he can let it out. Mina says she'll be here to comfort him. He can show his feelings. Arthur takes that invitation fully, and finally, it all comes out. He bawls and cries in Mina's arms and leans his head on her chest. She comforts him as he bawls and says that she wants him to think of her as a sister. If he needs anything ever, please let her know. Arthur says it's the same for her. If Mina ever needs anything, think of him like a brother now. With the bond they now share, Quincy comes in too and can't contain his feelings either and starts crying. And Mina comforts him as well. She says that all of these are very good men. Later, Seward gets home and is surprised to see that everyone has already arrived other than Van Helsing. Not only that, they are all up to date on the situation entirely. Mina runs up to Seward after and says that she wants to see Renfield. She wants to see the man that is related to Dracula, a vampire himself. Seward isn't quite sure, but Mina's beauty charms him over. Seward goes to Renfield and says that he wants him to meet a woman coming to see him. Someone wants to talk to him. Renfield strangely eloquently says that he has to tidy up his cell first if a woman's coming here, to which he then eats all of his flies and spiders. Of course he does. Mina comes in and introduces herself, and Renfield is strangely very kind and eloquent and says, you must not be the woman Seward wanted to marry because she's dead. Mina says no, she's already married. That was Lucy. Seward wonders how Renfield even knew about Lucy. Renfield says that Seward is a lovely man and he hears everything in their little community at the asylum, so he knows all about Lucy and Mina and all of them. Seward wonders if that's really the same lunatic who ate bugs a few seconds ago. They all talk for a while and Seward once again notes how normal Renfield acts. Mina finally asks, how did he become what he is? Renfield says that he used to love life, but he isn't surprised that his friends wanted to lock him up. He loved life so much that he wanted to prolong it. So, what he did was drink the blood of living things. No matter how little the life is, the blood can sustain. Both Seward and Mina are fascinated listening to him. But they say, time's up, and Renfield says, it was nice meeting you, Mina. I hope I never see you again so I don't hurt you. They leave, and then Van Helsing finally rolls up. He gets out of his Ferrari or carriage or whatever, and he says that, he's happy everyone's here, and even happier that everyone is already caught up. He says Mina is truly a wonderful woman. The brain of a man with the kindness of a woman. Not even going to touch that. After which, he calls everyone into the dining room and they all sit down and get ready to figure out what to do. What is the plan from here on out? Van Helsing speaks up. They are against a vampire, a Nosferatu, something that is outside the current realm of science, yet all cultures have notes of them in one way or the other. They have existed for a long time and have been talked about only in superstition, and that's all they can really go on. Vampires have power over the elements, as well as can turn into many things, like wolves or bats. They can also turn into a mist for a short time or command those wolves and rats. They are immortal in terms of age, and they can feed to make themselves younger. They have the strength of 20 men and the ability to make more of their own kind. He asks now, is anyone out after hearing this? Does anyone no longer want to fight this threat? Now would be the time to drop out. No one reacts. Jonathan grabs Mina's hand and she thinks he's scared, but she thinks this isn't him scared, this is him determined. He looks ready. Van Helsing says, very well, we are now a group then. He says that although vampires seem strong and free, they are not. They are mere slaves. They cannot enter houses unless invited, though they can on subsequent visits. They have to either be in a coffin or in the ground when the day breaks. They are weak to garlic and holy symbols like crucifixes or Eucharists, and they can be killed by a stake to the heart. Van Helsing continues that their plan now is to find the rest of those 50 coffins of earth and search them. He continues talking, and Quincy gets up and looks out the window, seemingly not paying attention. When Van Helsing says they should start tonight, crackle rings through the air, but followed by glass breaking. Seward says that he even screamed when it happened. They ask, what the fuck's wrong with Quincy? And Quincy apologizes and says, forgive me, I thought I saw a bat on the windowsill just watching us, so I shot at it with my pistol. Seward asks, did you get it? And Quincy says, nah, it flew back into the woods. They all just accept it that the cowboy man just shot their window out, and they continue. Van Helsing says, all right, now it's time for Mina to leave them though, for he says that this is a man's job. Mina says she doesn't want to argue with him, so she just goes to her room. However, she stays awake and thinks of Jonathan. October 1st. Seward, Van Helsing, Quincy, and Arthur start to head out to find these coffins of earth, when Seward gets a message from Renfield of all people. It says that Renfield is extremely frantic and he is imploring that he is seen right now. Seward says, yeah, he's going to have to wait. But the servant who gave the message says he's never seen Renfield like this. It's really bad. Seward gives in and says, fine, he'll go look, even though it's 4 a.m. The others ask to come with him, and Seward says he doesn't mind, that's fine. They all head to Renfield's cell, and he greets them all strangely as if he knows all of them. He speaks eloquently like last time and says he's asking to be released. He feels quite sane, and Seward has seen the past few times he's been talking, he's in the right state of mind. Seward, for some reason, considers this and says he knows that people's mental illness can get better and worse, so he'll talk to him more in the morning and think about it then. Renfield then strangely gets on his knees and begs. He says he needs to be let out tonight. He can't say why, but he needs to. Seward, now a little freaked out, says no. He'll talk to him again in the morning. Then Renfield falls to his belly and begs to be released. He says he can't say why, but if he could, he would. This is imperative. I have to be let out, he says. Seward once again says no, and they're all gonna leave. Renfield then goes back to his bed and simply says, don't say I didn't warn you. They walk away, and Van Helsing says it's lucky that Seward was the one in charge, because if it were up to him, he would have been swayed by Renfield and probably would have let him go. They all agree, but Seward says he didn't let him go because he has ties to Dracula. If they let him go, there's a good chance he will do evil in the Count's name. They all say that makes sense, and they head out to the Carfax estate. They walk onto the property, and Van Helsing pulls out a skeleton key. He must have completed the Thieves Guild questline. They open the door and step inside, but Van Helsing does the sign of the cross before he does and whispers, "In manos tuas domine," which means, "Into your hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit." They all step over the threshold into the house, and it seems to be covered in a thick layer of dust. They all look over their shoulders as if something was watching from the shadows. Jonathan could swear he sees the Count's face watching them from around the corners and in the corners of rooms, but whenever he looks, there's nothing there. They all ask Jonathan where's the chapel in this place, because he knows the floor plan from when he sold it. Jonathan leads them, and they find 29 of the 50 coffins of dirt untouched. 21 of them are missing, but what that means is unknown as of now. All of a sudden, rats start pouring in the room heavily, hundreds of them. They all make a break for the door, but Seward retreats and blows a silver whistle. 3 terriers come from the door and chase down all the rats, eating and throwing them all around. The men manage to leave and head back home. Jonathan says if they were playing chess, this would be check against the Count. They know where he is, and they know where those coffins are. They all return to Seward's place, and they hear howling from Renfield. Jonathan checks on Mina, glad they left her behind, and says she looks a little pale, but okay. They all then sleep, and Jonathan notes that Mina was quite exhausted tonight. He had to call her 3 times to even wake her up. Seward then goes off to work in the morning, and Van Helsing follows, asking if he can speak to Renfield today. Or if Seward doesn't want to, Van Helsing says he can go alone and talk to him. Seward tells Van Helsing to just wait for the workday to be over and they'll both go. A couple hours later, Van Helsing comes back in, and Seward says that he has a break, he can take him to go see Renfield now if he wants. But Van Helsing says no, he already went. And Renfield was rather rude to him, calling him a disgusting Dutchman. So, it's whatever. They all go home and begin getting ready for their hunt for the coffins again tonight. Mina, however, says she's very anxious and restless, but they still refuse to talk about anything with the Count with her, and she feels a little weird about that. She continues writing that Jonathan thinks that she should go home and not stay in their little group house while this takes place. She doesn't know why, but she's had terrible sleep lately and weird dreams. Last night when they all went to the Carfax estate, she had a dream where a pillar of smoke and fire arose with 2 red eyes and did something to her, but she woke up right after. But she's worried. She laments that she's being really hard on herself, but she really thinks that if she never went to go see Jonathan in Budapest, she might have stayed with Lucy and maybe she wouldn't be dead. She just feels sick. She's tired. October 2nd. Jonathan goes off on a journey to find the coffins with the dirt. He finds one man and figures out that these coffins have been taken to 3 houses across London, but the main one is a house in Piccadilly. The other 2 houses have the remaining 12 coffins. Jonathan then surmises that the coffins are going to be spread out all over London so the Count can be anywhere and rest anywhere and turn as many people as possible to drink from, so he will be unstoppable. Jonathan bribes the worker that knows where the coffins are and finds out which house in Piccadilly is his. Jonathan goes there and sees that the house is really old and dusty, and there seemingly used to be a for sale sign out front. He can tell. but it was recently bought. He can't get inside when he tries the front door. He asks a worker who's outside who purchased this home, and the worker just refuses to tell him. Jonathan asks what if Lord Arthur Holmwood were to ask, that wealthy estate owner. The workers say, well, maybe if the Lord asks by letter, maybe they can tell him. Jonathan thinks, well, that's going to have to be good enough. He'll ask Arthur when he goes back to the house. Jonathan heads back to the group house, and he says that Mina looks even sicker, and he tells her to go to bed after dinner so the men can discuss what they've learned, so she doesn't have to be bothered by it. She does so, and after, the group discusses what happens. Then they figure that, well, first things first, they need to get into those 3 houses, specifically the one in Piccadilly. Van Helsing says, well, they'll just break into it like they did with the Carfax estate. Quincy then points out that the Carfax estate is in the country, and close by to their current group house. Piccadilly is in a crowded neighborhood. That'll be dangerous just to break in. They all think about it and agree that might be a little tougher. So they have to figure out a plan. As they discuss, Jonathan goes to check on Mina, who is weirdly clingy when he gets there, almost like she wants to keep him in bed with her for the rest of the night. Jonathan manages to pry away, and then they all discuss things by the fireplace and have a smoke. Afterwards, they say they'll continue the search tomorrow and let everyone get a good night's sleep. Jonathan goes back to bed next to Mina, who he says looks pretty sick. The day before this, though, Seward wrote in his journal about Renfield. He says that day, Seward tried to get to the bottom of things with Renfield. He asks him, why does he like flies and spiders? Is it to take their souls or their lives? Renfield says, well, their lives, of course. He has no need for souls. Seward says, but to take a life is to take a soul. How does Renfield intend to deal with all the souls he's collected? Does his own soul not weigh heavily with the thought of the souls he's taken? Seward says that Renfield seems almost childlike in nature, and he says he has no need for souls. He can't eat them, but he stops the sentence. Seward takes note of this and leaves for a bit. He returns later that day and starts to talk to him again. He says, what about souls, Renfield? Renfield then asks, what about souls? Seward says that Renfield must be quite burdened by all of the spider and fly souls he's collected. And Renfield says, fuck spiders, I can't eat them, but he stops as if he's about to touch a forbidden subject. Seward perks up. This is the second time that Renfield has stopped before he said the word drink them in regards to life. Seward thought to push harder. You want something big, like an elephant to take the life of? Seward jokes. Renfield says that's ridiculous. Seward then pushes harder. I wonder what an elephant's soul is like, he asks. Renfield throws up his hands as if he was a child to get up violently and says, I don't want souls! I have enough to deal with already! Seward backs away and Renfield calms down. Renfield says, he's sorry for getting up. He really does appreciate all Seward does for him, but he'd like to be alone now. Seward leaves him and comes to the conclusion that the Count has to be behind Renfield. Renfield is a vampire, he's sure of it, and he's sure that he's under Count Dracula's control. He's not sure how, but he is. Seward then goes home to discuss things with everyone and goes to bed. Back in the present, on October 3rd, early morning, around 1 a.m.
It's October 3rd.
Seward says that while everyone is doing their own thing trying to find the Count, he tries to get at him through Renfield. So all of a sudden, an orderly breaks into Seward's office and says, Dr. Seward, come quick, Renfield had an accident, he's covered in blood. Seward rushes into the cell and sees that Renfield is in a puddle of blood on the floor of his cell. Seward runs up to him and says, what happened? And sees that there's horrible wounds all over Renfield's face. He yells for the orderly to go wake up Van Helsing. The orderly does so, and Van Helsing comes in his nightgown. He looks at Renfield and says loudly enough for the orderly to hear, oh, what a horrible accident. Then he whispers for Seward to send him away. Seward sends the orderly away, and then Van Helsing goes and gets his surgery kit. When he returns, both Quincy and Arthur are too in their nightgowns in the cell. They ask, what's going on? And Van Helsing notes that Renfield's face wounds are superficial, but he has a fractured skull. Van Helsing begins working on Renfield, and everyone else paces nervously. He fixes him up slightly, and then Renfield springs to life, and he says, I'm on death's door, I know it, and I have to relay the dream that I just had to you guys. Van Helsing yells for Arthur to get the brandy, so he'll stay conscious. Arthur returns with it and gives Renfield a little of it. Renfield then closes his eyes as if to collect himself and says, it wasn't a dream, I know it wasn't. The other day, the Count came to my window. He was in a pillar of smoke and flame with his blood-red eyes looking out. He called to me at the window and pointed towards the Carfax estate where the dogs were howling and the rats were all over. I could tell he wanted me to invite him in, but I didn't. Then he summoned a cloud of red fog, and before I knew it, I invited him in. The Count gave me spiders and flies to play with, but the other night, Miss Harker came in. Mina. She was pale. I could tell that the Count was sucking life out of her. Everyone gasps, and Van Helsing says, "Quiet! Let him finish." Renfield continues. I became angry that he was doing that to the fair Mina. So when he returned last night, I tried to grab him because I heard madmen have unnatural strength, which I am mad sometimes. But he was superhuman. He flung me across the room and into the floor several times, and then he just disappeared into a mist and flew into the rest of the asylum. They all then just leave Renfield dying alone for some reason and rush into Mina and Jonathan's room, hearing that Mina was bitten. They break down the door and they're all horrified by what they see. The door open, Jonathan sitting on the side of the bed with a 1,000-yard stare, seemingly in a trance. The Count, huge and intimidating, is there, surrounded by fog, his bare chest open and Mina sucking from a wound in his chest. When the Count notices them, he throws Mina down and stares at them with such fury that they all freeze in their tracks. Van Helsing calls up a Eucharist, and the Count gasps and retreats past them. The moonlight all of a sudden gets blocked by a cloud, and they can no longer see. Someone lights a gas lamp, and they see that the Count's fog retreated under the door of the room. Arthur chases after it as Quincy runs to cut off the Count at the estate, when he sees a bat fly near it. The rest of them stay with Mina and Jonathan, and they try to wake Jonathan from his trance and grab Mina, who has blood all over her white nightgown. She all of a sudden wakes up and clings to Jonathan, and he clings to her. Jonathan notices that she's getting blood all over it, and she cries out that she's filthy. She's one of them. Jonathan tells her not to say that and holds her close to his chest. Arthur comes back and says that the Count went into their study and burned the manuscript in a blue fire, as well as broke the phonograph and all of its records. They all say that it's horrible. However, there's a copy of all the transcripts in the safe nearby, so they should be fine. Arthur then says one more thing. Although all the stuff was burned, Renfield is dead. Killed by the Count, no doubt now. They all fall silent, and Van Helsing asks Quincy, as he returns to the room, what he found. Quincy says he saw a bat fly from Renfield's window to the estate. They need to act soon. However, they all then look at Mina. They say that they need to tell her the truth. She was sucking on the Count's chest. She cries out and pulls Jonathan closer, and they ask what happened. She shakenly says, I went to bed, and when I woke up, a mist flew through the window. Jonathan was unconscious, and I tried to wake him, but the dark man emerged from the mist and said, Silence! Make a sound, and I will dash his brains out before your very eyes. Mina does as she was told, and the Count grabbed her neck, and she winced, but strangely she did not fight back. She figures it's because of the horrible curse he now has on her. And the Count says, Do not fret. This is not the first time I've drank from you, nor the second. He then began sucking on her, and after he had his fill, he ripped open his own shirt and opened a wound on his chest and told her to suck it. She did so, and he mocked her. Yes, you're mine, and you will do as I say. If my brain says something, you will do it. You are mine now. You are the flesh of my flesh, the blood of my blood. Then they burst into the room, and Mina cries out for God to forgive her. She cries out that she is in worse than mortal peril now. They all sit around Mina and check on her. They all agree that they can no longer keep anything from her. She must be in the know because she is now in grave danger, and she doesn't have a lot of time. Jonathan cries and sits next to her, and they ask Mina if she's okay with this, and she says she has to be. Besides, it doesn't matter anyway. If it isn't helpful, it makes no difference. Van Helsing asks why is that, and she says that if she even starts to feel like she's changing, she will end her own life. Van Helsing sits down near her and, almost crying, says, My dear Mina, you mustn't. You're in a position now that if you die, you'll be met with a quick undeath. You must try and live. You must. Mina looks around and everyone agrees with him. She has no choice. Jonathan pipes up now and says, We have to end this now! They all tell him to calm down. It's a good thing that Dracula wasn't residing in Carfax until recently, because otherwise he could have just killed them all earlier without them even knowing he was in there. Jonathan says they have to get into the house in Piccadilly then. Van Helsing tells him to calm down. Think about it. If they break in, the police will stop them and Mina will die. They will all sound crazy if they try to explain all of this to the police. Jonathan says he doesn't care. He'll call the best locksmith there is. They once again say that if he does, the police will be right on him. But then Van Helsing says he has an idea. What if they go during the daytime? Make it look like they own the house and they're doing nothing wrong. Do it in broad daylight when everyone can see, so they think that they own the house. It's like those stupid prank videos where they dress up in like corporate clothes and go into fast food restaurants. If you pretend like you belong, you do belong. Jonathan says that's a good idea, but they're gonna have to wait till 10 a.m. then. They all agree and see that the sun is starting to come up. They then say that they don't need everyone at Piccadilly. Arthur and Quincy should investigate those other 2 houses that Jonathan found out about, and Van Helsing, Seward, and Jonathan will go to Piccadilly after they try to seal off all the coffins in Carfax. Mina will unfortunately have to stay here. She is safe during the day, however. They all agree on this plan and then eat breakfast. Van Helsing then lifts a communion wafer and pledges to get this done. He then tries to bless Mina on it with the forehead, but a scream rings out as if Mina was getting murdered. She falls backward and shows that the Eucharist has seared her forehead, as if it were a cow brand. She cries out and says, "She is unclean. She is so unclean that even the touch of God will burn her. She says she will keep the mark until Judgment Day." They all then comfort her, and Jonathan thinks to himself that if they cannot save Mina from becoming a vampire, he would rather follow her into that dark path than kill her. They all then finish, and Van Helsing, Seward, and Jonathan start to head over to Carfax, but not before Jonathan says goodbye to Mina, and he says he will never forget this goodbye. They all make their way to Carfax and nail a Eucharist to each and every coffin they find. After which, they then head to the train station, and Jonathan sees Mina in the window of Seward's house as they leave. Then they go on the train. They get to Piccadilly in the afternoon, and Arthur and Quincy say that they will help them get in the house, and then they're going to go to the other 2 houses. Here's the plan. Arthur and Quincy will get a locksmith, while Seward, Jonathan, and Van Helsing sit nearby in a park and smoke cigars, because 5 men doing this would look weird. It should just be 2. They all agree, and Jonathan, Seward, and Van Helsing go to a park and take a cigar out and smoke it. They watch as Arthur and Quincy get out of a cab with another man with tools a little later. They go up to the house and begin working. A policeman walks by them and says something to the locksmith, but they both just smile and get on with their business. The door unlocks, and the locksmith gives them something and walks away. No one was the wiser. The 3 come from the park and step inside, and Quincy says, "Smells like shit in here." Jonathan agrees. It smells like death. They then look around for a bit and find that 8 out of the 9 coffins are here. 1 is missing. They have to find it. But for now, Quincy and Arthur will go to the other 2 houses and nail Eucharists to the other coffins they find, while Seward, Van Helsing, and Jonathan do the same thing here. It would appear that the Count is not currently in the house in Piccadilly, because they would most certainly be dead already if he were. Arthur and Quincy leave to get their 2 houses, and the other 3 get to work in this one. They look around a while and talk. They can all see that Jonathan is terribly nervous and pained, although the fire inside of him burns stronger than ever. His hair seemed to go gray with worry, though, and the lines in his face more pronounced. They all say that they have the Count on the ropes now. They will succeed this day. Then 2 knocks at the door. They recognize it as a telegram boy's knocks, and they open it. The kid hands him a telegram, and it says, "From Mina. D is on the way. He left Carfax around 12:45. They wonder how he could have been in Carfax when they were there this morning, but they all got ready anyway. Then, another knock. Van Helsing slowly opens the door, and Arthur and Quincy come in saying they went to the other 2 estates and destroyed all the coffins. That means there's only 1 single coffin that remains where the Count can rest. Before they can even think about doing anything, though, a key can be heard in the front door. The Count is here. They all hide and get ready to fight, but they have no plan. Quincy usually would be the one to come up with the battle plan, but there's no time. They all hide, and the Count enters. He seems cautious. Before they can even pounce, he jumps like a panther across the room. Jonathan jumps in front of their front doors so he can't escape, and watches as the Count sees them all and gives them a furious look. The Count tries to jump back towards the door, but Jonathan takes out a kukri knife and slices him. It barely misses due to the Count's fast reaction, but cuts open his shirt and tons of money falls out. Dracula feints an attack, but then jumps down, grabs as much money as he can, and jumps out of the window. They all watch as he gets into a stable in the backyard. The Count yells, "You think you've cornered me? You think you've destroyed my coffins? Nay! I've already won! I own your women!" They all rush down and open the stable doors, but the Count has seemingly disappeared inside of it. After which, Van Helsing says that despite what the Count says, Van Helsing can tell he is terrified. He is running out of options. However, it's almost evening now, and they have to get back to Mina. They all leave, and Mina does not look great when they get home, but she puts on a brave face. They say they will tell her about what happened over dinner. At dinner, Mina sits them all down and tells them to give pity to Count Dracula. He may be undead against his will, just like Lucy was, so give him some form of pity. Jonathan says he will not. He will send his soul straight to hell if he can. Mina tells Jonathan he's being cruel. All of them begin crying and fawning over Mina. They all say that they don't have a next move now. They don't know where the last coffin is. They all begin weeping even more because as of right now, it looks hopeless. Mina's fucked. But then Mina pipes up again. Dr. Van Helsing, I want you to hypnotize me. Van Helsing thinks, oh, that might be a good idea. They put her on a bed and Van Helsing makes strange movements with his hands. They all watch in amazement as she seems to fall asleep. Van Helsing asks out loud, where are you? She deadpan says, I don't know. Van Helsing asks, what do you see? She replies, nothing. Van Helsing asks, what do you hear? She replies, water, waves crashing, feet above me. They all look at each other and understand that through her connection with the Count, she can see what he sees. Van Helsing then asks, what are you doing in this water, in this ship? She replies, nothing. I am still, deathly still. At this point, the sun had begun to rise on October 4th. They all say that they know what's going on. Van Helsing belts out, the Count is escaping. He's like a cornered animal. He knows his time in London is at an end, and he's retreating overseas back to his castle in Transylvania. We must pursue and destroy his unholy being. Mina awakes and then gets her bearings and asks, why? He's retreating. He's not a threat anymore. Van Helsing says, because. This unholy man may retreat now, but he will feed again. He has eternity to do it. But you only have a small life of a mortal woman. Mina then faints from the exhaustion. In the morning, they eat breakfast and Seward explains that Jonathan should stay with Mina while the rest of them pursue the Count and finish the job. Jonathan says he doesn't like that, but he doesn't have a choice. They figure whatever ship the Count is on would need to go through the Dead Sea to get back to Transylvania. The only one that has set sail recently is one called the Catherine. It is heading from London to Varna to Danube. The men still on the journey go to the port and bribe a man to tell them all about the Catherine and its journey and what's been going on with it and where it's going and stuff like that. The man on the dock says that it was very strange. A tall and pale man came here with a straw hat that didn't fit the time period. He says that the tall man told the captain of the Catherine that he needed to set sail, but the captain said he wouldn't take anyone who wasn't English. And besides, it would take some time to get going. He couldn't go right away. The tall man then left and brought a large coffin, no doubt his last one that he could sleep in, and put it on the ship anyway. The captain cursed at him more and more, but then an unnatural fog whipped up and started making it very hard for the boat to stay still. If the boat were to stay docked, it would sink. So all of them, including the Count, left the dock and made their way towards Varna a couple days early. The group, having what they came here for, returned home. October 5th, midnight. They all try to figure out their next move when Mina asks if all of them going is really necessary. Van Helsing, finally angry with Mina for asking, says, necessary? It is necessary. This man has a taste for blood. He's like a tiger in India, where if the tiger tastes human blood, he will no longer want its normal prey. He is also eternal. If he were made by God, he might be amazing, but he is not. We are the instruments of God. We must finish this once and for all. We cannot take this to the police, because the skepticism of man is the Count's greatest ally. We must be the armor and the sword of God. They all are roused by this speech and say they can't do anything tonight though, and tomorrow they will figure out more things to do. Mina and Jonathan then go to bed, and she says to him that she feels strangely at peace all of a sudden. They wake up the next morning and all have breakfast. Seward, Jonathan, and Van Helsing have a quick sidebar after though. Van Helsing says to the two men quietly that, although he hates to say it, Mina's blood is poisoned by that monster, through a sort of baptism of blood where she drank from his chest. She seems quieter now, and Van Helsing thinks that maybe she knows more information than she's letting on, and the blood of that monster is causing her to feel pity or something for him. Think of how recently she said that they shouldn't kill him. Seward agrees, and Jonathan says he doesn't like this. They'll discuss this later. They then discuss the real plan with all of them. The Catherine will take 3 weeks to get to Varna. However, if traveling by land, Varna is only 3 days away. If they assume that they have delays on the land, and the ship gets there a few days early, that gives them still an extra 12 days at the latest to leave. Everyone seems in agreement, and Quincy says that that's wolf country, right? He recommends that not only do they take their spiritual weapons and pistols, but he has some Winchester rifles as well, and leave it to the American guy to bring up guns, but it's good in this case. Van Helsing says he loves that idea. The four of them will begin preparing to head there in a few days. Mina asks, "The four of you?" She looks around. They say that Jonathan's going to stay here. Sometime after the meeting, Jonathan sits with Mina on the bed and she asks him to keep a promise for her. He says, "He'll try, but what is the promise?" And she says that she wants him to keep all information about their plan from here on out away from her. She cannot be trusted and she knows it. Jonathan takes her hand and says, "I swear." October 6th. In the morning, Jonathan gets up and Mina immediately says that she wants Van Helsing for something. Jonathan thinks this is about the hypnotherapy again and gets him, and as Van Helsing comes in the room, Mina strangely says that actually she wants to join them on the journey. They all come in with Van Helsing and say that's a bad idea. But then she says, but she's connected to the Count. She could use this weird telepathic connection to somehow aid them and find him. Besides, if she's here, the Count could somehow just will her to go there anyway. Better if she's with them that way from the start if he does that. They can follow her right to him then, if that happens. The four men take another sidebar away from her and say that although it seems dangerous, it might be their best chance. They all agree. After which they say Jonathan goes too then. Afterwards, Jonathan updates his will so that if he dies, everything goes to Mina. And if she's gone too, the other four shall divide all that he has. October 11th. Everyone gathers at midday. This is the time where Mina is most lucid and not under the effects of the poisonous blood of the Count. She has them all gather and she breaks down into tears. She says this may be the last time they can all gather like this and she is still herself. She asks them all to make a promise to her as men. Should the time come, if she is too far gone, she wants them to cut off her head and fill it with garlic like they did to Lucy. They all make that promise, other than Jonathan, who hesitates and says, "Even me?" And Mina says yes. As her husband, he, most of all, should. Jonathan says, okay. He agrees. But then she asks him one more thing. She asks that if this were to happen, he has to preside over the funeral. He should read the eulogy. Jonathan breaks down and says he doesn't know. But she says he has to. He finally agrees. October 15th. They go on the journey and arrive in Varna without a hitch. Mina is doing well, and the Count is still on the boat, as they learn from the many hypnotherapy sessions from Mina. The boat makes a stop in Varna before continuing on to Transylvania. Their plan is to get on the boat during that stop and kill the Count before he can make it back to his castle. Seward says that Arthur has talked to the dock workers, and people told them that there is a boat heading here with a coffin that contains stolen goods. They were impressed with Arthur's manners, and they told him that he and his friends can do whatever they wish to the coffin when it arrives, because it's stolen and honestly, who cares what happens to it. However, the group hopes that Dracula's body will turn to dust when they stake him, because if it doesn't, they may be tried for murder after that. But at this point, they don't even care. Van Helsing says he will stake him and everyone else will run interference if something goes wrong when they get on the boat. October 24th. All they can do is wait for the boat to arrive. They continue to monitor Mina. She has not yet grown sharp teeth, but they know if it happens, well, they don't wish to speak about what will happen if it does. But they've received word that the boat has bypassed Varna and is going to a different city now, a city called Galatz. They figure they have to figure out some way to get there. A train is going to go to that city, but the boat has to be there. But they don't know the schedule of the train. Funnily, Mina immediately says, it'll be at 10:30 in the morning. That's when it'll arrive. They all look at her strangely, and she just says, I like trains. I'm a train fiend. Although this seems funny, Seward, Jonathan, and Van Helsing then have a sidebar. They say that Mina's been acting really strange these past 10 days, which is to be expected, but the other day when Van Helsing was checking up on the Count with the hypnotism, he had a feeling that it was going both ways for some reason. The Count could be using Mina to see what they are doing as well as the other way around, but Van Helsing says he's going to do everything he can to get her out of the situation. However, he does not know how the boat bypassed Varna. They think they can still catch him off guard, however. October 29th. They all go on the train, and 2 more hypnotism sessions happen with Mina. The first one, Mina says that all she hears is water, and it seems steady, as if they're docked. As she comes out of the trance, she lifts her arms up as if lifting something heavy. They all know what that means. He's docked, but he's still in the coffin for now. They all feel nervous on the train, but they know the final showdown is fast approaching. They will arrive in Galatz tomorrow between 2 and 3 a.m. The next trance, Mina says she feels like it's slipping. However, she can hear water again and cows and a cold breeze. It fully slips, and she says she can no longer use the connection to find the Count, just when they need it most. October 30th. The train is now nearing Galatz. They try to give Mina another hypnotism session, but she just says, "I've been lying this whole time. I was asleep. I don't know anything about the Count." It would seem that she is now poisoned to a point that she no longer wishes to be helpful to them in that way. So, they all get a hotel in Galatz, and Arthur attempts to wire London to see if they can get themselves on the Catherine, which is now at the port. Later, they hear back and see that they can. They all go to the boat, and the captain says that he was told by a man named Emmanuel that he was going to grab a box or coffin on board. It's no longer on the boat. Apparently, this Emmanuel did so, and then the group chases him down and finds him in his office. This Emmanuel says that, yeah, he did do that, but someone else told him to do that to get it past customs. A man named Skinsky. They look all around town, but they cannot find Skinsky. But someone calls out that a body's been discovered, and it was in a church, his throat ripped out by a wild animal or something. The men go to look at the body, and it was sure enough Skinsky. They were once again at a standstill. They all head back to the hotel and are exhausted. They've been given the runaround by the Count all day and for nothing. Even Jonathan lies ragged on the couch. Mina, however, says, actually she wants to help out now. She thinks about it. The Count has to be being helped by someone. If he could do all of this on his own, he would, but he keeps getting help with people. Therefore, the Count needs help to get home. He cannot travel by road due to it being too many people and police, and he cannot travel by rail either for similar reasons. So, thanks to her latest vision, she surmises that he has to be in the water again somehow, on a different boat. His goal? He needs to get back to Castle Dracula. And there's only two rivers that could possibly get him there. The Sereth River or the Pruth River. It is then revealed that all the men were listening to her work this out, and they all applaud her, and they say that the only river that makes sense is the Sereth River, because there would be no one else on it. All the men say how smart Mina is. Then they think they have to make a plan here and now. This is it. There needs to be 3 different parties from here on out. There needs to be one on horseback chasing the boat, which probably has Saganis on it. One party needs to be behind it on another steamboat, and one needs to head to the belly of the beast at Castle Dracula itself. They all decide that Quincy and Seward will take the horses along the river, and Arthur will take the steamboat behind the boat. Van Helsing says that Arthur is weak and not trained in combat, and he needs someone else to be on the boat with him. He says that Jonathan should go with him. Jonathan protests. He says he has to stay with Mina. But Van Helsing says he knows how Jonathan feels, but Arthur cannot go alone. He's weak. And besides, Van Helsing and Mina are going to go straight to Castle Dracula. Jonathan says he forbids it. Van Helsing tells him to calm down. This is the only way. Mina needs to go in case her psychic connection with the Count can lead them there. And Van Helsing is the only one that knows all of the languages of the region to rent a carriage to get to the castle. Jonathan says, but, you're taking Mina to that horrible place? None of you have even seen it. Van Helsing promises that he will gladly protect Mina with his life. He will die for her if need be. Jonathan says he doesn't like this, but there really is no other choice. He agrees. October 30th, late night. A while later, they all take their positions. Jonathan rides with Arthur in the steamboat, and they say that it's in God's hands now. This is it. They're going to ride up behind the Saganis and take the boat by force if need be. Quincy and Seward are behind them on the horses. Jonathan says he's cold. October 31st. Jonathan says that all day they've been overhauling boats and checking them. Not one has been the right boat. They now fly a Romanian flag for cover. November 1st. Jonathan says more of the same. None of the boats have seemed to be the correct one. They're almost at Bistritz now, and their chance may already be over. It might be too late. November 2nd. Jonathan wakes up late that day on the boat, and Arthur said he could have woken him, but he seemed peaceful while doing it. He didn't want to wake him back up to this grim reality. Jonathan says he hopes Seward and Quincy are doing okay, but even more, he hopes Mina is alright. She must be getting near Bistritz now. If they don't find the boat soon, they may have to reconvene and figure out what to do next. They then transition back to October 31st, but from Mina's perspective. She says that her and Van Helsing make their way to Bistritz and eat some food at a hotel. It's good, and Van Helsing says she better eat well, because it may be a week before they get any good food again. They stock up on clothes for the snow as well as provisions for camping. Mina says that they will soon head for the castle, though she doesn't know how she's going to find it. Van Helsing tries to hypnotize her again, but only gets the response of, "It's dark and cold." She prays to God to have mercy on her soul. She knows what she's becoming, and she hopes God loves her anyway. For the next few days, they continue down this path. They meet several locals who are very superstitious of Mina due to her scar on her head. On November 2nd, Mina says that tomorrow they will make it to the Borgo Pass. She prays to God as they are about to be in the same place that her husband struggled so many months ago. It then switches to Van Helsing's point of view for the 4th of November. He says it's extremely cold and they have to make camp often to sleep because Mina sleeps a lot. He says that he keeps trying to get her hypnotized, but it's the exact same result every time. All she says is, "It's dark and I hear water." Except once when she thought she heard rapids, so they were going upriver. The night of the 4th, they make camp and he hypnotizes her again to the same result. However, when Van Helsing goes to sleep, he wakes up several times and sees Mina looking over at him with hungry eyes. He fears he will lose her soon, or himself if she can't contain herself. He's terrified. November 5th. In the morning, Van Helsing has a lot of trouble getting Mina up, so much so that he just lets her sleep as they continue on their journey in the carriage. She doesn't wake up all day, even for food. He's worried she died or something, but as he makes camp for the night, she awakes. She once again does not eat, however. Van Helsing makes a fire in the cold air and then makes a circle in the dirt and covers it with crushed up Eucharists. He beckons Mina to come closer out of the circle, but she would not. This is good, he thinks. The circle acts like a shield. It's an anti-sea bear circle. All of a sudden, the horses begin whinnying and crying out, and the fire starts to die as Van Helsing goes to replenish it, and Mina grabs onto him and asks him, "Don't go." All of a sudden, as the fire dies lower and lower, the horses begin freaking out so bad and they try to run away, but they're tethered. Eventually, they freak out so bad that they have heart attacks and die. The horses literally die from fear. And then the snow dances around them, and those same 3 vampire women from the castle appear near their camp. Van Helsing immediately notices them and knows what they are because of Jonathan's diary. He quickly grabs a Eucharist and a piece of firewood and goes near them, and they back away from it. They look at Mina and say, "Sister, sister, come with us." But Mina looks horrified and does not leave the circle. Van Helsing thinks that at least Mina is still human for now. This proves it. Van Helsing sits with Mina all night and stares down these women with the Eucharist and fire. As the red dawn breaks many hours later, the women disappear back in the direction that Van Helsing figures the castle must be in. He tries to see how Mina is doing, but she suddenly has fallen into a deep sleep. He tries to wake her, but to no avail again. He eats breakfast and gets ready. He has no other choice now. He's going to leave Mina here in the circle and go to the castle alone. Back with Jonathan and Arthur, they run into trouble with some Sagani, but quickly dispatch them with their Winchester rifles. Van Helsing then approaches the castle. He brings with him a blacksmith hammer and he breaks the door off its hinges, and thanks to Jonathan's journal, he knows just where to go. He goes upstairs and breaks the Count's room's door as well. He goes down the spiral staircase to the chapel and sees several coffins. The first one he saw had one of the women in it. She looks beautiful, dark, and vicious. And then something comes over him. He doesn't know how or why, but all the hatred in his heart for these creatures began to not have a hold on him. Instead, he almost wanted to stay here and just watch this woman sleep until nighttime. But he tries to shake free of the spell, but cannot. He just stands there and watches her. All of a sudden, though, a scream rings out horribly loud, and he can tell it's Mina, her lovely voice. It breaks him from the curse for a second, and in this second, he looks away. He gets ready and opens 2 other coffins nearby and does his best not to look directly at them. Also, there was a huge coffin nearby. On it, one word: Dracula. This must be where the monster sleeps, he figures. He quickly does the Eucharist trick so he can no longer return there, and then he laments how hard it is for him. But he strikes down the first vampire woman, then the next, then the next. The red foam coming from their mouths and their bodies crumbling to dust before him after, as if they've been alive centuries too long. After the sickening task, Mina rings out again. He knows she is nearby still, and he rushes out of the castle and nails a Eucharist to the door of the castle as well, and seals it with paste. Dracula can no longer return here. He then rushes back to Mina, who he finds asleep. He doesn't know how, but he wakes her up. She looks pale and skinny, but her eyes still wild with life. She sees how distressed he looks and asks what he did. But then she just says, "We must go east. I can feel my husband and Rester there. They're close." They both get up and look at the horizon to the east. November 6th. They both look on in the horrible snow and they continue. They bring clothes and a little food just in case as well. As they walk, they hear wolves approaching. They have to hide. They find a small rock with an indentation in it like a doorway and they hide there. Van Helsing says that this way, if the wolves come, they have to come single file so he can fight one-on-one with each of them. They both look eastward again, and in the terrible snowstorm, they see a river. One they feel they should have seen before. Near it is a road. Mina yells, "Look!" to Van Helsing. They both look in the clearing in the snow, and there's two men on horseback chasing a wagon with a box on it. She can't tell, but she thinks it's Quincy and Seward. They rush the box, and Mina notes how the sun is going down. It's almost red, and the light is beginning to disappear. Van Helsing says those two have to hurry. If they wait another minute, the shadows will fall over the sunlight, and Dracula could take any form and escape or kill them all. The wagon, being led by Saganes, is being rushed hard towards the castle. Just then, from the other side of them, Arthur and Jonathan yell for the Saganes to stop! But they take no heed and continue rushing towards the castle. In a moment of teamwork, both Quincy from his end and Jonathan from his end rush the cart and both jump on it. They fight off the Saganes and throw the box onto the ground. However, as they do, the light falls from the land. The box opens and Mina notes how Dracula's face lights up in triumph. A Sagani rushes Quincy and stabs him in the side, but Quincy pushes him off, and in one fell swoop, Jonathan slashes at the Count's throat and Quincy stabs him in the heart. Everything is still. Mina notes how, from her position, she could see the Count's eyes as this happened, and strangely, a look of peace washed over him, of acceptance, of thankfulness. He then crumbles to dust before all of their very eyes. The Saganis scatter, and Van Helsing and Mina rush over to Quincy and Jonathan. Quincy lies there, bleeding horribly from his wound. They all look at him, and Mina gives him her hand, and he holds it in his own. He smiles and says, "It was all worth it for this," as he points to Mina's forehead, where the scar of the Eucharist has disappeared. He collapses after saying, "My God," on the floor, dead. They all say Amen over Quincy's body. Mina notes that he died as he lived. A gallant gentleman. One page left. Let's read it in full. Jonathan Harker's journal. 7 years ago, we all went through the flames, and the happiness of some of us since then is, we think, well worth the pain we endured. It is an added joy to Mina and me that our boy's birthday is the same day on which Quincy Morris died. His mother holds, I know, the secret belief that some of our brave friend's spirit passed into him. His bundle of names linked our little band of men together, but we call him Quincy. In the summer of this year, we made a journey to Transylvania and went over to the old ground which was, and is, to us full of vivid and terrible memories. It was almost impossible to believe the things that we had seen with our own eyes and heard with our own ears were living truths. Every trace of all that had been was blotted out. The castle stood before us, reared high above the waste of desolation. When we got home, we were talking of the old time, which we could all look back on without despair, where Arthur and Seward were both happily married. I took the papers from the safe where they had been ever since our return so long ago. We were struck with the fact that, in all of the massive material of the record is composed, there's hardly one authentic document. Nothing but a mass of typewriting, except the later notebooks of Mina and Seward and myself and Van Helsing's memorandum. We could hardly ask anyone, even if we wished to accept these as proofs of such a wild story. Van Helsing summed it up as he said, with our boy on his knee, "We want no proofs. We ask none to believe us. This boy will someday know what a brave and gallant woman his mother is. Already knows her sweetness and loving care. Later, he will understand how some men so loved her that they did dare much for her sake." Jonathan Harker. But that is it. That is Dracula by Bram Stoker. There's quite a lot to talk about in regards to Dracula in terms of analysis. In fact, there's 3 parts to this analysis I'd like to talk about here. The first part is the characters, then we will go over the themes that I got from this book myself, and what modern audiences get from it, and then finally we will go over what historically the book was supposed to mean, or what audiences back then thought the book meant when it was created. But before we start, thank you all so much for watching this whole video. It was probably a harder time to sit through this one due to it being so old and long, but I believe that the beginning and the end of the book are very good, even if the middle drags a little bit. I also want to thank you all for sitting through the entirety of my 100,000 subscriber video. It means a lot, and I want you guys to let me know what you think the book means or what you got from it. So thank you so much. And let's first get into the characters and what audiences think of them, or what they at least meant to me. And we will go in order of my favorite characters to my least favorite in terms of the main characters. Let us start with my favorite character, and that is Van Helsing. Van Helsing is pretty much the most, if not one of the most important characters in Dracula's downfall. He is quite strange, and he is very funny at times. He has a sense of humor, which is otherwise absent in the book entirely. There are moments where he does things, and I think to myself, what the fuck's wrong with him? But at the same time, he is very serious when he needs to be. However, at the same time, he's not the main character, really. He's almost like a guardian figure or teacher, though he himself is strangely, in my opinion, the one who fights against Dracula the hardest, though he doesn't get the final blow. My second favorite character is Mina, which seems weird to me to say, or it might seem insensitive, but let me land here on my opinion here. Back during the times when this book was written, not a lot of literature had female heroines or main characters, and back in the day, she was seen as a damsel, however, a very competent one, which was strange for the time. There's obviously feminist literature from around this time period, but it never got to be as popular as things like Dracula or Frankenstein, which has stereotypical male heroes. Nowadays, a common sentiment is that Mina is quite capable and even more of a fighter and hero than most of the main characters here, like Arthur for example. Mina is extremely intelligent, and she always has been a well-liked character for that reason, even back when this was written. A true survivor, and with some of the themes, it makes a lot of sense why she is seen that way, but we'll get to that. My next favorite character I think would be Dracula himself, which before I read this book, I thought he was like in every part of the story, but he really isn't. He's quite the unseen villain. We only see him in the first act and then the third act. He's pretty absent from the second act of the book entirely, though his influence is palpable at all times. Back in the day, Dracula was seen as a satanic evil in this book. He's very anti-Christian and anti-religion. However, at the same time, and we will go over this a little later in the analysis as well, he was a representative of a foreign invader. It was quite a xenophobic view, but he was Eastern European, and he quote-unquote invaded England in the book. Old audiences seem to think that he was a metaphor for immigration of non-civilized people to the land of London, as they would say. Nowadays, Dracula is almost seen as a tragic figure, and he's purposely written that way. In the end, he seems to accept his fate, and that is what older audiences used to get from that scene, but a lot of modern audiences, including myself upon first reading this, didn't see it as Dracula coming to peace with losing. It is more of him being happy that his own reign of terror is over. He can finally rest, and deep down he wanted this. He was out of control and could not even stop himself, whether it be the vampiric disease that was controlling him, or his metaphorical thirst for power. He wanted to be stopped. However, one of the biggest themes that ties in with Dracula's character, we will discuss in a bit, so put a pin in Dracula for now because we'll come back to him. My next favorite character is Jonathan. Jonathan is and always has been something of a blank slate. He has a personality, of course, but he's literally just supposed to be a normal guy, an average man, almost like an audience stand-in for what everyone would probably do. He has shown how this whole situation, because of how unbelievable the situation is, would grate on anyone. His emotions start to get the better of him near the end, but in the end, his resolve hardens and he becomes the hero he is meant to be by being one of the two men who strike down Dracula. Next is Seward. Seward is a pretty important character that doesn't really get talked about a lot. He's almost like an observer for most of the book, and he's a very scientific man, so much so that he doesn't believe any of this stuff at first. He's seen as a skeptic, and one that is not tempered with experience like Van Helsing is. I don't mind him, but he really is kind of a side character that doesn't do much other than get rejected by Lucy. Next is Quincy, who is literally a stereotypical cowboy. He used to be seen as literally just a stereotypical hero. Hilariously, he loves guns, so even back then Americans were known for that. And he literally just shoots things at a moment's notice, which is pretty funny and awesome. He's trigger happy. But I mean, in these circumstances, that's pretty understandable, and if I had a gun, I might do the same thing. But I really don't think he was very interesting until the very end of the book. But it shows that through and through, he was a hero. He dies for a woman that he loved even platonically. He was truly a good man. Next is Lucy. Lucy was seen as somewhat of a strange character back in the day. When this book was written, women weren't really shown to commonly be sexually or aggressive or assertive in any way. So it was a very divisive character when she became a vampire and was very sensual and somewhat sexual. However, this could be seen as Bram Stoker writing that women who are aggressive and forward are bad, according to some sources I've seen, but I wasn't alive back then, so I don't know if that was really the common sentiment. But seems to be that it was written as if the danger of women stepping outside of social norms was to be watched out for, or at least it was back then. Nowadays, Lucy is seen as an innocent victim, one that didn't deserve any of what she got. She truly was innocent, someone who literally had it all and lost it all. I don't mind Lucy, but unfortunately she doesn't really have too much of a character to get to know other than she's a sleepwalker and she's a victim. My least favorite character in the book is Arthur. Back in the day, he was seen as a rich, noble person who had a pure heart and was just genuinely a good person. And I may be a minority on this, but I really didn't like him that much. He seemed to almost be like a pretty boy who didn't want to accept the truth. Sure, it's sad that he didn't want to accept his fiancée was a vampire and doing all those horrible things, and maybe it's just me, but I just wanted him to just accept it. But if I were in that position, I obviously would act the same way. So maybe I don't like him because I would act in the exact same way as him. We know there's a real vampire in the context of the story, but if it were me in real life, I obviously would tell all the other people that they were crazy if it happened. If my fiancée died and I was just told she rose from the grave and is eating people and we need to cut off her head, I would also be probably pretty emotional and not accepting of the situation. Okay, let's go over the actual themes now, shall we? Let's start with what audiences thought back in the day of the book. Like we mentioned a bit in the character of Dracula, a big theme here was the fear of a foreign body, whether that be an actual foreign person, or invasion, or illness. In terms of a foreign invasion, Dracula is seen as evil, barbaric, and ancient, something compared to the stereotypical good guys that are Christian, smart, modern, and scientific. Dracula lives in a fucking castle, okay? He's seen as old barbarism versus modernity, a sort of modern versus ancient ideals. In that way, the past can corrupt the future. Let me explain. If we go with that idea that the theme is that the past can come back and do damage to the future, look no further than Dracula himself. He is a threat to modern society by using barbaric old magic ways to get his way, literally sucking the life out of the new to bring back to the old. Another theme that is touched on a bit back then, that was seen back then, was sexuality, specifically female sexuality. Mina is considered the main lady of this book. Every single man fights to keep her safe and pure. After all, look at her friend Lucy. She died and became sexually free and sensual and predatory. They didn't want Mina to become like her. This point is really nailed home to me when Dracula has a single line near the end of the book and he says, "I have already won. I own your women," as if he's fighting to make the woman more sexual or sensual or free. In that way, a lot of older audiences seem to think the book was about temptation of sex or morality, or even the fear of females becoming liberated and more autonomous, which is, not great nowadays, but back then that's what it was really thought about. But what about modern audiences? First things first, Dracula is way more sympathetic character to modern audiences than old audiences. He is seen as almost a tragic character in modern times, rather than just pure evil. More modern retellings of the story, like Castlevania or Helsing, for instance, frame Count Dracula as a misguided, emotionally hurt man rather than a pure evil being like it's implying in this book. To go along with that point, nowadays he is seen as a stand-in for an abuser. He is violent and literally grooms people to do what he wants. He is predatory in all forms of the word, straight up sexually and just actually a predator in terms of a killer. However, he, and longtime viewers of the channel will like this, can also be seen as a cycle of an abuse victim. Like I mentioned earlier, some audiences seem to think at the end that Dracula is thankful he dies, whether that be because he is freed from the curse of vampirism or the curse of his emotions making him do this to appease some long-gone struggle that he has had. Because think about it, in terms of vampirism, someone had to have turned him, right? He wasn't born a vampire, probably. He's just continuing a cycle. And through the power of love and good men and women, the cycle is ended with him. Another thing people seem to think the story about is STDs. Think of Dracula for a second. He is a monster that spreads his disease through blood that is almost comically close to an STD. That ties back into fear of sexuality because things like diseases can spread. Another one that can be seen is addiction. Dracula literally needs blood. He doesn't eat like a normal person or pursue normal things. He has one-track mind. He wants to spread his disease and get more blood. He has to get more blood, or he will probably wither and die. However, I want to make a statement about Dracula that is not unheard of. I believe that this book can literally be whatever humans fear most. The topic itself of this book is flexible enough that it can be fit to literally any threat, and that is why Dracula is a timeless classic. Thank you all for watching. I had so much fun with this book in this video, and I hope you enjoyed seeing my disgusting face at the beginning. It wasn't an easy thing to set up with all the props and the chair that I bought. It was quite the intro for me as opposed to the Silent Hill intro for the 1000th time. Let me know what you think of that intro in the comments, and maybe I can bring it back sometime, and if not, I can just as easily use the classic Silent Hill 2 intro again. But a huge thank you to all of my Patreon supporters you see on screen, because they truly help me in ways that are not necessary, but appreciated heavily. If you want to be like them, you can head over to my Patreon and become a super supporter. But until next week's Extreme Movie Night, or the week after's book, which is The Lord of the Flies, I cannot thank you all enough for what you have done for me. I will see you all next time. Bye.